Yeah.
Has they got all my submissions, 58 pages?
Yes.
The council?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks,
Morena koutou. I'll just kick off with the karakia this morning. Kia tau, ngā ranga, ngā naro, ki runga, ki tēnā, ki tēnā,
Tautau,
kia maria, te hua, mahi, kia toi, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te aroha, kia tutu, ka whakaroa, ki tēnā, hui kai. Let the strength and life force of our ancestors be with each and every one of us, freeing our path from obstruction so that our words, spiritual power, love and language are upheld, permanently fixed, established and understood. Forward together. Thank you. Okay, got the usual health and safety start, so I don't think we have
on the screen.
On the screen behind you. Toilets are out to the right, evacuation, down the stairwell, not the elevator, earthquake, drop, cover and hold. If we could please make sure our phones are turned to silent. And just a reminder that these proceedings are being recorded for the purpose of live video, both streaming and downloading. So by remaining in this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed for viewing by the public. Right, I'll kick off the meeting. I have an apology from Councillor Fraser. Are there any further apologies? There being none, I'd ask someone not to move that apology, please. Thank you, Councillor Menzies. Councillor Both for aye. All in favour? Aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Right, do we have any requests for leave of absence? There being none, I'll move to the Councillor.
I'm just checking what my current leave of absence was. I'll be away from the 13th of June to the 22nd.
That's been
Yes, I'm just not sure whether
I know we had you covered for May, but I can't remember.
yes, it's not on here.
okay, we'll record that again.
Yep.
Councillor Chamberlain.
The 16th of August. Zoom in and
Yep. Cool.
So you're going to move.
Yeah, I'll move that. Can we have a seconder for Councillor Menzies' absence? Councillor Graney, all in favour? Anyone against? Carried. So, any conflict of interest for today's meeting? There being none. I don't think there's any extraordinary or urgent items.
Nope.
We've got the council minutes from the 3rd of May and the 17th of May, so that's page 6 on the agenda. And page 18. Would someone like to move that those are true and correct? Councillor Vadenclaw, seconded by Councillor Spraggan. All in favour, please say aye. All against? Carried. Okay, I'll move on to the public participation. We've got 2 people speaking this morning, although only one of them seems to be here.
Dylan's just emailed a few minutes ago to say he's stuck in the traffic out near Wallistown.
Right, okay. So we'll let Ms Baker, who is coming through via the phone system, go first. So just noting that there's 5 minutes, and I'll welcome Ms Baker to address the meeting.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me present via phone today. I had surgery to remove a growth on Monday, so it takes a lot of heartfelt passion and courage to present to you today, but I felt it was necessary. I'd just like to start with some positive things about council. Can you hear me?
Yes, they can, yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, so I'd just like to say that the mowing and night cats is awesome, and the work done by the contractor is well worth the money that is paid by ratepayers, I feel. Mowing around Lime Hills War Memorial has also been very nice, and the gardens in Okaukau and Winton are always looking nice, so it's a credit to the contractors. There's been really good helpful customer service at the Okaukau Library, so thank you. And I just wanted to say the karakia is very lovely at meetings. Thank you. My godmother was a Māori, so I really appreciate that. So moving on to my response to the Southland District Council's proposed rate increase for 2023-24. Just like to briefly go over a few things in my presentation, which you should have 58 pages. So the proposed rate increase of 6% increased dollars amount. My rate, as you'll see in my notes, they're going to go up from, well, with your proposed 3190 to 40 cents to 3,523, an increase of $333 approximately. So the rates are already high, and with the high cost of living, I feel it's unfair of SDC to increase rates this much. I'd just like to say, what has SDC done to reduce rates? And I'm not talking about cutting costs and core services. One ratepayer said in your submissions online, some of the planned projects, implied that they, should be put on hold because they're not as essential in the money for those projects given back to ratepayers to reduce rates. So I think that's a fair comment. In 2017, my rates were $2,097, and with the proposed rate hike, they're going to go up by over $1,400 since 2017. I live by myself and do not use as much water and other SDC services as other multiple occupiers of properties may do. Therefore, why should I have to pay as much for these services? Water should be metered, I feel, as it is in other areas, some of New Zealand, and be on a user pay system. Just a thought. Drainage in Nightcat Line Street has been flooding in the last 2 years. You've seen the photos that I've presented in my presentation notes and submissions. There's no curving channel on the left-hand side of the beginning of Line Street. These small towns have things that need fixing on the roading system. So, volunteers, I'm just moving quickly through my stuff. You'll see a Parliament report from March 2023 about my petition. I feel that SDC don't formally, letter or certificate, praise all volunteers who may want this formal acknowledgement. What SDC needs to appreciate, please, and respect their value is the time and effort it takes to report safety issues like wandering stock, uncontrolled dogs, broken road signs, as you see in my photos, potholes, trees down, etc., by volunteers like myself. It's not just the other important volunteer work like cleaning up war memorials, cemetery, or other caring things that volunteers do. And last year there was a report done by government stressing our approach to volunteer. That's attached with my submission. It mentions that the economic value of volunteering is estimated at $4 billion per year. That's a lot of money that volunteers are volunteering their time and effort. It also says about strengthening the recognition of volunteers. I've just gone over a few things from my submission, and I just feel that with the high cost of living, which in an article was 8.2% I read online, that SDC please, reduce rates. There shouldn't even be an increase in rates because people with the high cost of living, it's just really hard. And I'm going to put this challenge out to you guys too, to SDC representatives and staff. Why don't you get on your push bike and bike 22 Ks to get food in a backpack and then bike 22 Ks home per week for the last year like I've done to cut costs. And it's sobering to do that kind of thing because, we all have to tighten our belts, and please, Southland District Council, think of the poor ratepayer out there that has to do the same. God bless you all.
Thank you for that, Ms. Baker. Appreciate you taking the time to present to us. Do we have any questions from the board, Ms. Baker? Are you still there?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, cool, yeah. Yeah, don't think there's any questions. So, I'll thank you once again for taking the time to present and appreciate the feedback at the start. So, thank you very much.
Okay. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, so our second speaker has been caught up in the traffic that I think a lot of us experienced this morning as well. So with the permission of the meeting, I'd suggest that we move to 7.1 and then come back to that speaker when he arrives. So
7.1 it is on
page 37 of your agenda, and I'll welcome Kelsey to the table.
Through you, Your Worship, good morning everyone. I'm here to talk about the retrospective unbudgeted expenditure report for Tuatapere Community Housing. I'll take the report as read, but will summarise the main points. The 4 Tuatapere Community Housing buildings were down for a re-roof this year, along with the Manapori Hall re-roof, which we lumped together and went out to market as the lowest price conforming tender. Our local contractor, Stern Roofing Limited, won the tender with the lowest price. Upon award and signing of the contract, it was not made clear to Council that the price for the Tuatapere Community Housing was per unit and not lump sum, due to both parties misinterpreting the pricing schedule. Therefore, the contractor agreed to the incorrect price by accident and did not bring to Council's attention. Upon receiving the invoice for the completed works, Council and the contractor both realised our mistake, and even with this invoiced amount, the contractor was still the lowest price conforming tenderer. Council paid this invoice in full to protect Council integrity and reputation. This is a great local contractor who just received our Health and Safety Award 2 weeks ago. To pay for the difference, it has been approved by the asset owner that we can bring forward the $26,000 from the Tuatapere Community Housing painting budget from the 24-25 financial year, which we're confident the remainder of that budget will be more than sufficient to cover that financial year's maintenance required. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Just one question from me, just around the process of that misunderstanding. Have there been changes made to the form to ensure that that doesn't sort of happen in the future?
Yes, there has.
Are there any further questions from Councillors? Councillor Duffy?
Is the new roof colour steel so it doesn't require painting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Oh, thank you, Kelsey. So we've got recommendations A through to D, noting that we approve the retrospective unbudgeted expenditure of up to $26,012 to install a new roof for 4 community housing units to be funded by our loan. Someone like to move that? Councillor Chamberlain, second by Councillor Ruddle. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. We'll move over to 7.2 now, which is on page 41 of your agenda, the long-term plan, project plan, plan for plan.
Through your worship and councillors, I'm here to present the long-term plan project plan report to council and seeking approval of the plan. I'll take the report and the plan as read, but I'd like to just talk through some of the points of it. So the long-term plan process is an opportunity for council to take a long-term view of activities and their impact on communities throughout the district, and the development of the long-term plan requires some significant planning and engagement with internal staff, councillors and communities to ensure the final plan is robust and fit for purpose by the 30th of June 2024. We have actually already started with this plan. However, it's important that council see the scope of the work required for the long-term plan and the framework for the long-term plan, the time frame the long-term plan team is working towards. The plan covers the next 14 months and will finish with the adoption of the 2024-2034 long-term plan. Guidance from Taitoda Jigsaw 2024 explains the streams of work, and that's a document I'll use predominantly within my planning process to this point. And it sets out details within each of the pieces of the puzzle. So there's 20 streams within that puzzle set out by Taitoda, and a number of activities within each of the streams. So to date, Council has attended a 2-day future focus workshop, along with another subsequent 2 workshops setting Council vision, values and discussing the strategic priorities, which is a great start. Activity managers have prepared workshops for Council, with 2 already presented within a field trip that, last week, which I felt was a really good way of doing that workshop. Great to see things in situ. The financial and infrastructure strategies are underway, and they'll be presented to Council later in August. at this stage. So the key points I wish to raise today is the time pressure that the LTP team is working within to complete the plan. There's a number of risks associated with the plan. So these are actual risks and some potential risks. I'm not suggesting that they're all there, but the possibilities. So there's an ongoing complex central government legislative reform that's having a massive impact on the long-term plan, and whether we know that's happening around the waters conversation. When that's going to be handed over to the entity, and along with that, there's the RMA Act as well, and some other pieces within that are going to be impact. So that has some resource constraints for staff around that. So the capacity of staff, I guess. There's some late data sets. So we've been expecting some data to be coming through and been expecting it for a while. We're still expecting the data, so having that data coming in late does have an impact on some of our planning. We do the best that we can with what we've got, but some of our data is older. The lack of or low community engagement within the process, and Louise and I have been talking about that. Staff not being available to complete key pieces of work, and that's a potential risk in terms of positions available at the moment, and some council non-participation in the process. If that happened, we are at risk of getting this LTP through. So to complete the LTP on time and to a statutory level, the LTP team needs to be able to access the right people at the right time. We need clear direction from council for the scope of the LTP, and we need to be decisive on the topics that have been presented. To help with this work, to help getting this work done, the attached plan sets out the timeframes for the main pieces of work within the plan. The LTP team also are running an Excel spreadsheet with streams of work identified and the owner of each stream managing that piece of work. So the LTP team is pulling staff from all different areas of SDC business. The corporate performance lead, myself, has a weekly check-in with our CE and weekly catch-up with the leadership team. And I'm also working really closely with my GM here beside me around the plan. We also have a workshop timetable that is a very live and very flexible document. This is being discussed with our CE, EMEA, and beside me here on an as-needed basis. I'd like to say it's only weekly, but it seems to be a little bit more than that at the moment. But that's great because we are adjusting to what needs to happen at what time. So we're looking to make sure the right information is being presented to council. We're also looking to use technology more in an attempt to get the information in a timelier manner and to make the information more accessible. Our activity managers are completing summary documents prior to their initial workshops. These are expected to be with me for distribution 5 days prior, and I acknowledge that that did not happen for the last workshop. However, we're well underway with the reports for the next workshop. Engagement is vital within preparing the LTP, and our comms and engagement manager, Louise, and I have met, and we're planning an engagement workshop with council, discussing potential topics for the consultation document. So staff would like to recommend that council approves the plan with any amendments as required. Lastly, I'd like to highlight again the timeframes as being our biggest risk. We staff need to continue to produce information that's informative and succinct so that council can be decisive and supportive in the process. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Robin. And I guess the report actually shows the complexity of the whole process. And yeah, I'd just like to thank you for the work that you're doing on this and coordinating it all and getting it to our outcome. Just quickly from me before I hand over the floor, just a couple of little, on page 57 there's a reference to CDAs. I just wondered if it would be worth removing that. The Solgum health check. I just wondered what that was. Is it a staff or is it on page 57?
So it's an online piece that staff go through. We're actually doing that this week. Solgum is our algae partners, and so it's just a health check to see where we are in the process, what could be a risk right now, it just gives us a really good idea on.
So that's specific for the long-term plan?
Specific to the long-term plan, and it's internal, it's not external, it's just helping with that planning process.
And lastly, before I hand over the floor, I just wondered if we needed to add the airport review into the list of,
Good point. Yeah.
That's a good point, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll bring that in.
and I'll, Councillor Menzies, I think, had your hand up.
I think one of my questions has been addressed, and I think the other probably has as well, because I noted under the potential risks that the first one there is around data, trends and analysis are weak and the probabilities are high, which is of key concern. Yes, where the risk is placed. But you've answered that by saying the expected data hasn't arrived, or is there something else we need to know around that?
We're getting some more information coming through from Great South soon around beyond 2025 work. That's a lot of data sets sitting in within that. We've had a presentation already, but the final piece of that is at the end of this month. Of course, there's the ongoing LiDAR data as well, and when that gets completed and then modelled so that some more comprehensive planning can be done around our assets and climate change. Yeah, the changing climate.
Get that, then the analysis to be undertaken by our staff, and is there further risks around availability of staff to do that?
At this point, there doesn't appear to be risks around availability of staff.
Any further questions? Councillor O'Brien, then Councillor Ball.
With regard to councillors, the councillors are responsible for the setting of strategic priorities and policy, the approval of activity management plans and overall LTP prior to audit in accordance with the Local Government Act. Think about that, and then we look at reporting and monitoring. Is there anything within the Local Government Act with regards to peer review process or performance process with regards to councillors?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that one.
In terms of councillors, I don't believe so. I mean, you've got a decision-making, you've got your skill set around the room. You've got to do the best decision-making that you can with the information in front of you. So no, that's unless there was something that was odd in the way that you were preempting. Obviously, we need to be careful from a elected member's perspective when you're going through this process not to preempt. You need to hear through the consultation process the feedback that comes, and then at the end of that process still have an open mind and then make a decision. So long as councillors are doing that, you do have the decision making around this. So.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Robin and friend. The roading rate model review completed, which we did some work on that last week, but that's not finished. We're going to come back to that during this process, aren't we?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Graney.
Can I just clarify on page 58, what's the resident survey involved?
Louise, do you want to talk to that? The residents survey?
Through you, Your Worship. In the past, we have run a yearly survey that asks the same set of questions each time, so we can do comparison from one year to another. It has been made smaller over the years, and so it's really only focused on key elements through water and waste and customer satisfaction. And I guess we're looking at doing it again.
So it does assist with the levels of service conversations, which I think is important.
Would it be possible for us to have the questions at some point and just have a look at it?
It hasn't, certainly, but it hasn't even got to the stage of questions yet. But when we do,
When we're ready for that.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Like those.
Before it goes out, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking at page 53, and one of the risks mentioned is low community take-up and support, and to prevent it, we build engagement processes. I was wondering, do we have any sort of benchmarks about say this is the number of responses or something that we are looking at? What do we measure here?
Sorry, I didn't actually hear the first part of your question. What was
talking about a low community uptake and support, And we say that to mitigate it, we build engagement processes into the LTP development to drive uptakes. Do we have any benchmarks? What do we, I mean, very broadly speaking, what do we measure? How do we say, I mean, what does success look like?
Ways,
Ask Louise to answer.
Your Worship, we don't have concrete benchmarks. It really is done issue by issue. So when we have LTP consultation issues that are really people are passionate about, you'll get a whole lot of consultation, like response. And then when we might be in a holding pattern, for example, like last time, then numbers can vary. So it's a hard thing to measure because it's also it's not just the consultation that we do, it's also what else is going on across the community. So if we look at, we've got other consultations going on for Environment Southland and other things like that, so all of that can impact on it as well.
So we don't have any internal benchmark as such for this metric, right? Thank you.
Well, I guess that would actually be a good discussion point in that content engagement workshop. And just for a reference, last year I think we had 256 plus minus submissions to the long-term plan. So I mean, there's kind of a measurement there.
Yes, if we want to
what we had last year. Any further questions? Yeah, Councillor Keast and then Councillor Wilson. Keep it up here.
Thank you. Excuse me. So on page 59, just around the communications and the consultation document, the dates there sort of don't give much time for feedback because the consultation documents design and template draft seems to be going to in November 23, and then there's an update in December, and then review it in December. So there's not much time if we would choose to make any changes there. I'm just wondering if that could be streamlined a wee bit, or like some way to actually get a little bit more input into that before it's too late for the process.
We'll take that on board and make some changes then.
Through you, Your Worship, it will be challenging to do that considering the audit process. That is usually the difficulty in all of this, is that we have to meet the time frame of the audit, and then we can't change it after it's been to audit. So yes, we can pull it back in 2023, but that's going to be hugely dependent on what the consultation issues are and what you as council decide are the priorities.
That's an ongoing discussion that we have to have about what we see as the issues then.
Correct.
It's not a surprise for anybody as to what's going to be highlighted there.
That would be critical for those that have to write it as well. So yeah.
Absolutely, thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Rob. Just thinking broadly, in terms of the timeline and the resources, one of the deliverables is the waste management plan. So just wondering, as far as developing that and the consultation process, how that ties in with the neighbouring councils through WasteNet. Is that a separate consultation approach, or is it all still part of the SDC LTP consultation, or does WasteNet kind of have a pre-consultation on maybe what that waste management plan may look like on a regional approach?
Did you want to?
I was going to say, I'm going to ask Cameron to respond to that.
I guess just like what I kind of, and Cameron may wish to correct me, but the regional aspect of WasteNet will the outcomes of what WasteNet does will feed into our long-term plan process. So yeah, there'll be almost a two-step decision process. But is there anything you want to add to the response?
No, thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy with that answer.
I guess the question being is that timeline looking good to feed into this process from that broader conversation?
Yeah, going with the WasteNet and the member councils of WasteNet being in the same position as us, we're all kind of, there's a need for us to all be aligned with all those sort of processes. So yes, that will. Well, if there's no further questions, we've got our recommendations on page 41. We approve the project plan, and I'll just wait for Fiona to come back. You can see it up on the screen. It's amended on there that we add with the addition of the Te Anau Airport Review and deletion of the reference to CDAs on D with that change. Is there someone in a position to move? Thank you, Councillor Bakerai. Second by Councillor Greenie. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Thank you.
And just in time, we have our Fiona, let's put that down.
Okay, any
Okay, I'll go backwards a couple of steps and we'll go back to our public participation and I'll invite Dylan Graves to address you. You're welcome to come up to the table up there and we've got 5 minutes to speak. And
just over here?
Yep.
Can I come to the side so I'm not got my back to you guys? Hi there, I'm just here to bring awareness to biochar. I did send some information around, so hopefully you might have had a look at that. But I'll give you a real quick summary of what it is. So it's basically taking biomass, heating it in an oxygen-controlled environment so that the fire then breaks it down. Gets all the volatiles to come out of the biomass and get burnt. Okay? That leaves behind a really carbon-rich substance with lots and lots of little holes, nanotubes in it, where all those volatiles were. That is then an excellent soil amendment. It basically acts like a sponge and it holds water, it holds nutrient, and it's basically a big hotel for biology to live in. So it benefits sandy soil, benefits clay soil, and of course it's sequestering carbon as well for the long term. They say conservatively 100 years, but it's more realistically thousands of years. That carbon is recalcitrant, it doesn't break down unless you burn it again. It doesn't get broken down by the biology or anything like that. That's as quick a summary as what I can do. And I'd love, if anybody would love, ask questions, please. The reason I'm bringing it to awareness of councillors and the like is that I think it's good if property owners would see biomass, woody, debris, branches, trunks, and that see it as a resource rather than burning it in a pretty polluting, unfriendly way. See it as a resource, and two things they can do. One is they can light the stack of wood on top and let it burn down, and in effect that controls the air that's getting into the burn, and then having a way to extinguish it before it all just turns to ash. I mean, ash is a resource, but it's not as good as if you can actually extinguish it with water or with soil and then take that char that's left and crush it up, inoculate it, and then put it out to the land. It can be spread out by a spreader. It could be put through animals. It could be put into potting mix, into compost. It could be put into holes when you plant trees. So it's got a multitude of uses. Yeah. Okay, the questions then.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good presentation. Do we have any questions from the floor? Councillor Bakerai.
I was just looking up some of the details you talked about, Councillor.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Dylan. How do you break it down? Like your big wooden pile, there's a lot of wood burnt in the country, and how would you break that down once you put it out?
Once it's put out, it's char like you have at the end of a campfire or a barbecue, and you've put it out. It's quite light, it's quite soft. It basically just needs some kind of physical. Some people drive something over it, a tractor or a car or something like that. Otherwise, ideally on a larger scale, you'd use a hammer mill, something that whacks it, and on a smaller scale, it could be a mulcher, chipper, something like that, something mechanical. Yeah.
and you say you put it through animals, you feed it to animals?
All over the world, that's already been done. Where I used to live in Australia, the pelletized animal feed that could be used for cattle, chickens, ducks, he was putting 2% biochar into that, so that the pellets themselves were actually a dark grey colour. And then it goes through the animal, it's good for them, and then their manure is taken into the ground by earthworms, dung beetles. So there it's nature kind of putting the char into the soil for us. We don't even, all we needed to do is break it down, crush it up, and put it into the mix of making the pellets. So yeah, there's ways to do it fairly simply.
One more question and then Councillor.
We've the council's just finished spraying a whole lot of gorse, poisoning a whole lot of gorse on community land. Is that a resource that could be used in a different way? Because I imagine now we're going to end up with some poison sticks. I don't know what the plan is for those, but is there something that would do with gorse?
So unfortunately, if there's contamination, it's likely that it would be remaining in the char, because char is actually, because I said it's got all those holes in it, and actually the cation exchange capacity is really good, so it's really, that's why it's so good at holding nutrient. So it will also hold negatives as well. It's used in remediation as well, a lot. But if you've got contaminated stuff, like if you're doing it with biosludge from sewage, then that char just cannot be put onto agricultural land. That char could be put into concrete or into roads or in some kind of more industrial use. So there's kind of two pathways. Non-contaminated biomass can go into agricultural soil and benefit that. Contaminated would go into more in industrial use. So it still would have a use, and yes, charring gorse would be fantastic. Yeah. And then you're still sequestering the carbon long term.
Final question from Councillor O'Brien.
Well done, Dylan. My understanding is that biochar has a really massive surface area, which you've just sort of indicated, and is particularly useful in areas where we have drought conditions, because it holds the nutrient, it holds soil moisture, and so on and so forth. I've got a friend who's the head of biochar in the UK, and they've been doing a huge amount of work and development over there. And if you're interested, certainly put you in contact with him, because I'm sure that you can probably share some really good resources there. And my understanding too is that what they're doing in the UK is they've got like mobile, what's the word?
Could be a retort, or it could be a pyrolysizer.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
The second word, what was it?
Basically, the process is called pyrolysis.
Yes.
So pyro, fire.
Yeah.
Lysis,
So basically, they get the organic material, they stick it in a machine, and then it spits out biochar on the property and on the farm, and the farmer or whoever it is, whatever industry, then can use it. And so I think that they're doing this in parts of Europe and the UK, I understand. Is there I mean, what is your driver, or what do you have a sort of a long-term business plan associated with what you're trying to achieve here?
Me personally, no, I don't. I just see biochar as one of those huge potentials. It is already taking off in Europe. It's going to be on carbon exchanges. It's definitely one of probably the number one kind of easiest solution to sequester carbon, to mitigate climate change and all that kind of stuff. And it's got all those other co-benefits, which are fantastic. I guess it's just bringing awareness to you guys when you're doing planning, trying to improve the way that property holders are dealing with their waste, seeing it as a resource, but also where you have input into any kind of projects to do with biomass. Like the future's work is moving towards biomass, and wood economy. So, why not have a biomass replacing coal, but at the same time be tuned to give us biochar as a side income, side product, basically offsetting a whole lot of the other fossil fuel use involved in transporting the biomass and chipping it up and all that kind of stuff. Or we go, well, let's sacrifice 20% of the heat energy
put it into the biochar, and then go and put that out where we really need it on the soils, where there's high leaching, where there's drought conditions, or any of those kind of things where we really need it in the soil.
You, Councillor Duffy, did you have a...
Oh, yes, I did. It's partly answered. I was really asking the purpose of coming to tell us. Is it just to raise their awareness, or are you looking to set up a plant later or whatever?
No.
So
I do workshops though. I can teach people like from the basics in an hour and a half exactly how you actually make it. So I do those workshops, but I'm in contact with the Biochar Association in New Zealand. They just don't have any funding. Everyone's a volunteer, and so it's just people like, people involved just coming around and getting the awareness out there. And there are some people there who have more expertise than me, and they would be able to consult on scale projects, but they're all doing it as volunteers at the moment. Yeah.
I suspect I know the answer of the next bit, and that is there is no process that you see in a similar vein that could actually deal with coal.
Deal with?
Coal. Make it, take out the effects that it's having now in a carbon sense.
I'm not sure.
I've not asked that very well, sorry.
Sorry?
I mean, what you're talking about for dealing with wood, etc., great. I'm just wondering, is it too hopeful that perhaps there might be a process similar that could work for coal to do the same thing?
I think so.
I mean, coke is coal that's been heated, and they take off some of the gases, and then you've got a different substance that does different temperatures and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's probably along the lines of what I'm asking, really. So the residual of coal being coke, the negatives have already escaped into the atmosphere anyway.
Yeah, and the fact that it's a fossil fuel that we're burning.
That's what I mean.
Stored sunlight from a long time ago. This is a way to, because the thing is with biomass, it's naturally going to decay anyway. So, for example, if you leave forestry slash in the forest, it decays, and pretty much most of that carbon is released back into the carbon cycle. What biochar will do, though, is take out 20% for, like I said, 100 years, but thousands of years. It will take 20% of that carbon out of the cycle. And that's what we need to kind of, we've released all that carbon with burning all the fossil fuels for the last 300 years. This is one way to kind of offset and take real carbon out of the cycle. And only if it's done on a mass scale would it make any difference to all the carbon that's been burnt in the past. This is the thing. It needs to be done on a massive, massive scale. If we have a wood economy, great, but it's not actually going to reverse all the emissions that have already taken place.
Well, thank you very much for that. It was a very interesting presentation. I appreciate you taking the time to come and visit us.
Please feel free, anyone, to keep in touch if you want to do workshops or more information.
Thank you very much.
So I can pass on those details to you if you want.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Are you going to stick around for a bit, or?
I think
My phone
did you
number.
get my email address?
Yeah, we'll be able to supply
Stuff that was passed around?
Yeah.
I think the owner was sent it through. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we now have the investment implementation decision, page 61 of your agenda, with recommendations on page 63, and I'll welcome our Chief Financial Officer, Ian, to the table.
I'll just grab it. Fiona. That one and that one. Thank you so much. Let's lean it back. Good morning, everyone. So it's my pleasure today to present to you the investment implementation decision. We've had numerous conversations about our investment and liability approach over the previous years. So this basically is the last step. We've drawn down from the LGFA, we've become a member, and now we're looking to say, do we wish to basically take our reserve funds that we currently have and invest them in the balance fund? And members, we've already appointed potentially 2 fund managers. There's been Milford and Westpac, and so this is the decision that needs to come from there. Now, if you remember rightly, in December last year, the Financial Assurance Committee made a recommendation to Council, and so that's one of the key things that we're going to talk about today. So what I wanted to do was not regurgitate everything that we've done and has happened, because that's what my report was all about. Okay, so hopefully that report is the way for you to find that all out. I will say, though, that I do have to note my apologies for a little error that I've made numerous times in this report, and that it should be LGFA, and for some benign reason my brain can't get past LG and it puts LG and Z everywhere. So I've got a little piece of paper here today to remind me, so yeah. Sorry about that. So if we just recap back, the investment policy itself allows Council to invest its general reserves in 3 ways. Okay, it can put it into the bank by way of cash. It can internally loan it, so that's where, say, for example, Waikaia might have had some reserve monies from, it might have had some leftover funds that it didn't use from last year, and it goes, oh gosh, I've got this pot. And then over in, we might say Winton goes, gosh, I've got to put in a new footpath over here, I don't have enough funds. So by just within our accounting system, we just internally loan that cash. Okay, so we take the cash out and we loan it over to Winton, and we keep a register of both of those things happening. Okay, so we know exactly what the reserves are that everyone has, and we know what those internal loans are. And that's what we've been doing for all of our years here. Okay, we've just internally loaned everything. We have had the scenario, of course, that our internal loaning, or the cash reserves that we've got, has suddenly got to a point where we don't have enough. So we've had to go to LG and Z anyway for our cash funding requirements. LG and Z, around here. LGFA for our cash funding requirements. So that's going to happen by default anyway. The other thing, though, that Council did do at the last investment policy was put in an option to invest those reserves in a balanced fund. Okay. Now, it's an or thing. It's a Council decision. You don't have to do any one of them. You can do a combination of them. It is your choice. All right? So that's the policy. So I guess the discussion for today is just this final piece of the puzzle, you know, and I think we just need to reflect back on one key piece of information, which is why did the previous Council include that option to allow for investing in unrestricted reserves into the balance fund, and then how's that changed? Because as we know, the markets are changing on a daily basis. So what was the decision-making made around that time was on a certain set of circumstances, but of course now, today, those circumstances have changed. So therefore, there's a decision, maybe it's not applicable anymore for it. Right? The second part we're going to talk about is just consider the finance and assurance recommendation that you're all party to in December, and that recommendation was to Council to proceed to invest in the balance fund. Okay, so Council now has to consider that and goes, does it agree or not? And if it does agree with that recommendation, is it going to also agree with the Finance and Assurance's decision to put it in over 2 years, quarterly, with 50% invested in Milford and 50% in Westpac? Or, if you don't agree with that decision, what is the situation or event that would change this, if any? So that's what we're going to cover off. So here's some reasoning. And so what I've done this time around is I've done it in numerical form. Okay, so I've said, here's the reasoning that they had back when we put this into the policy. Now these are the things that are impacting on these decisions, okay? So we've got LGFA borrowings at the time with 2.2%. We had a balanced fund return that we were advised would pretty much average us out at 5.5 return, and a management fee on that fund of 1.1. So the net return was going to be around 4.4%. We also had Council making a decision to apply interest on its reserves at 2%, and Council also deciding to charge interest on its internal loans at 3%. And then it said, well, gosh, if we're investing at this level and we're only borrowing at this level, we're going to have some leftover funds, so we're going to offset our rates by the difference, okay? And they decided to do $750,000 at the time. So if you just take that scenario, so this is back when we did the policy, if you take that scenario and you look at what it meant, so if we invested those reserves back then, we would have been having a surplus of around $636,924 for that year, based on that occurring. Okay? If we had carried on as we were though, and we had just continued to internally loan it and borrow what we needed to, because we have to, so basically that's that there. There's our reserves at 34, and there's the money that we would have had to have borrowed at 37 in order to cover those internal loans. We were going to have a deficit situation of around $150,000. Okay, so that's why they put that option in there to do a balanced fund, because the market conditions were such that they were brilliant. I mean, borrowing at 2%, 2.2% was fantastic. Okay, so that's the reason. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay.
Sorry, Anne. Then you've got 5.5% return, but I mean over the last year it's only been 3% return in the markets.
I'd say it's lower than that, to be honest. And that's the thing. Council recognise though that this is and that's what I've got up there, the assumption of return in the mid to long term. That's what it is. It's not going to be always that, and the next examples will show this. Okay.
I think just to clarify as well, it's also important to note that the LGFA funding is over up to 16 years as well, so it's a long-term borrowing, so you can fix that rate for it's a maximum of 16 years, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yep, and that's why I've just put up it's a very valid point. That's why I've just put in there. We've got low to medium fluctuation in that. Right. So what I then did is I've just tried to briefly summarise how market changes can affect those returns. All right. So when our policy was agreed, we were, as I showed you in that previous slide, we were getting 636 potentially if we were going to invest, but if we carried on, we were getting a negative return. Our annual plan for 23-24 is sitting around a break-even situation, okay, whether you invested or not. Right, now if I just go forward a little bit, and that break-even situation is based on the fact that the LGFA borrowings are 4.35. The balanced fund is still the same, right? The council's decision is still to apply 2%, but it's also, we've had to increase the monies that we need from our ratepayers to pay for those internal loans, because that's what we need to cover, all right? So there's an assumption of that. And suddenly, then, you get the scenario where you're in the break-even. I'm just going to try and work out how to go backwards. Okay. So that's what we're in there. Now, if I took the same information though, and I said, how about I apply it as of today, and I did it on the 1 year balanced fund return, and I also did it on the current situation, but based on a 10-year balanced fund return, you suddenly see the impacts. So, from memory, if I just find my little tiny piece of paper here. So realistically, the returns for the last year were, let me just think here, were 1.28%. That was the average return for Westpac and for Milford. Then their fees were about 0.93, so you're getting a 0.35% return. So hence, if you are just looking over this last year, we would have been making a negative return of $1.3 million. If we continue to do what we're currently doing, we've got a surplus of 324. If, however, you look at the same situation and you say, well, hang on, let's look at it over a 10-year basis, because that's what a balanced fund's all about. It's not the annualised result. What does that mean? It's saying, well, actually, year on year, you would have been earning $756,000. Some years it would be right up there, and other years it would be really right down, which is what that 1.3 is.
Just caution then that that's a big assumption you're making there over 10 years.
That's what it's about.
Big assumption.
Yeah, but that's what it's about. That is what the returns are. I'm not saying that's an assumption. That's what the returns are over the last 10 years, based on the information that I've got from Milford and from Westpac, which is available online. Okay? You're dead right in that the returns for the future, you never know. And that's what this thing is showing. But that's what you have to consider today.
And that 10 years includes the last year with the...
Yes, yes it does.
So that's an actual return rather than an assumption that's based on a 10-year period.
That would have been the averaged return over those 10 years.
Yeah. Assuming that that's what you get in the next 10 years.
So what we can read from this, though, is that effectively we have to consider that in some years, like this year, we may have had to fund some rates from a loan effectively in order to meet our rating requirements, and then effectively had to repay it back from future years' earnings on that balanced fund, because that's what's going to happen. It's going to be up and down.
Thank you, Worship. Just for clarification, so that does this scenario include the 750 required?
Yes, it does.
So that's taking that out.
Yes. Thank you. It does.
And would you be able to smooth the fluctuations out so that in a down year you wouldn't have to necessarily borrow? Like if there was extra above, could you actually almost provide a smoothing? Or
Yeah, you're going to have here. The accounting's going to be fun, but we'll have to keep some. We'll have to keep some sort of running record effectively. But you're going to have to be borrowing, and then you're going to be repaying it back in the years that you've got it. I'm thinking that by default we'll have some sort of level of investment which will be equal to the unrestricted reserves, and then at the end of the year we will draw down from that fund or pay to that fund whatever we need to do.
Sign there about pair going off.
That one's that one.
Councillor Chamberlain?
Through you, Rob. Just so I get my head clear, like so the Railway Community Board Fund, they've got about 1.8 million. Is that sort of the money you're talking about putting into this?
No. So council's decision was to put its unrestricted reserves into the balance fund.
Just clarify that.
Yeah, so it's got a series of reserves. There's about $33 million worth of reserves, and we've isolated to date about $3 million of reserves we call restricted. Now, one of the things that we need to do as a council is sit down as part of this process and go, what is defined as restricted? At this point, restricted is something that is probably a lot more external in nature. So like the Northern Southland Fund, Meridian Fund, we're treating that as the Ojai Railway Board Fund, Development and Financial Contributions Fund, John Benge Fund, there's an endowment for a cemetery. So any of those monies that have sort of come in with some conditions around them or were a specific purpose, we haven't. Having said that though, council can make a contrary to decision. So if it made the decision to invest some of those unrestricted reserves, it can. We would just have to have a separate resolution for that, and we would note the reasons why, and if we were going to change the policy in the future. But at this point, they weren't prepared to take the risk on those funds. That was the decision they made at the time.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, the discussion was that the railway, that the return they were getting on that money they didn't think as a committee that was good enough, but
exactly.
Yeah, but I just wondered where that money, what you classify as unrestricted loan.
Yeah, that was what council did at the time, but like I said, they can make a contrary decision to it.
Through Europe. When you say they can make a contrary decision, you mean the Ojai Railway Board on their own, and they can
no. They couldn't
recommend to council.
Yes. Yes.
And so we
because it is council funds.
On
yeah, so that board could pass the recommendation for what they want, and then it would come through. Potentially, would it be finance and assurance, or would it come straight to?
Yeah, I probably never thought about it, but I'd say it could probably just come straight to council effectively, if you wish to break it through.
Are you able to just sort of explain how has the LGFA's borrowing rate gone up as the bank's rates have risen? Do we see some sort of a trend there each time?
It's always
When did we last see a rise in LGFA rate?
LGFA rates are rising all the time. So the average rate now across that portfolio is 5.35%. So I just borrowed $5 million for council last month, and the fixed portion of the rate was, I think it's around 5.9.
So should we be re-looking at this one,
So that's why I put 5.34 up there, because that was the end of April situation. If I went out and I borrowed based on the proposal that was agreed.
So when we had looked at in the workshop in January, we had talked, you just mentioned a surplus of 75,000 if we invest and a deficit of 2K if we don't. That was at 4.35. So the differential would become even smaller now.
Yeah, so let me just see if I can go back a step.
This previous slide that we have, the interest there was.
So this was, yep, sorry.
The previous one.
So this one here.
So this 4.35 should be now 5.34?
Yes, so this is what we've done in the annual plan. This is absolutely what we've done in the annual plan, okay? But as of right today, because I've based an annual plan on that previous slide, but as of today, it's 5.34 if I was going out to borrow. So this is the situation as it would stand right now.
But just move to the previous slide, please.
Sure.
So this one, we were looking at a 4.35 and our assumption was 5.5. We were looking at 75,000. Thank you. If you could move now to the next one. 5.34 and
it's this return. I've changed the returns because I've done it on a scenario of 1 year. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was still thinking. Yeah, right. Thank you.
What's challenged in the management fee, because that's come down as well.
Yeah, so I've just taken basically the management fees as per the notifications that I got from Milford and Westpac. So the thing with Westpac seems to be more of a fixed fee, but Milford, they also have a fixed fee and then they have a performance fee on top. And of course, last year they didn't really get much on their performance fee. So all I've just done is taken the information that's publicly available to give you an indication of what it's looking like as of today or at the end.
Essentially, the biggest changes happened from when council made the original policy decision, is the closing of the gap between the borrowing rate and the rate of return.
It's a longer term decision. That's what it is. The thing that you just have to be wary of is that right now we are, if I just go back one, we are in this scenario. So if you enter into it now, expect to have these negatives and expect to have to fund it from one source or another. Yep.
And expect the negatives to potentially continue.
Yes, but I can also expect the positives to come as well. It's a balance. It's a
lottery.
But on the whole, we can we can look back at history to use as an indication, but we can't say that that's the way it will be.
And I guess that prudent nature of what we need to do is taking that calculated risk. I mean, anything that we decided around this is going to be a risk, but it's that knowledge and understanding and information behind it to make it a calculated risk. Councillor Wilson?
Does this decision of how we, or whether we continue with this policy and recommendation affect the LTP process, or does it more come down to an annual plan or annual plan?
No, it'll affect the LTP. It affects all our planning documents. So we'll make some assumptions on whatever you decide, and then we will adjust it accordingly, recognising that the actual results may be different.
So theoretically, if the LTP process, we get through to June next year without this investment and run with the current annual plan, not having that, ending up in the negatives, if the LTP is based on that decision, if the council then changed if the market changed and the decision was made next year to go ahead with the investment, then would the whole LTP process then be out of whack on a budget sense?
What we would do is just like you do with any changes to budgets, you just revisit it as part of your forecasting process and just look at it at that time. So you'd make it at the time you made the decision, you would look at it then and go, hey, this is what we expect would happen to our budgets now. And then in the forecasting, you would probably revisit it again. But your budget is your budget.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, well, your first slide had where to invest general reserves. They've already been invested in some infrastructure, I believe. That's why, if we want to release them, we need to borrow this borrowing facility. And I don't think it's a particularly good look for any council to be borrowing on behalf of ratepayers to take a bet in the share markets. It doesn't seem particularly prudent to me. I mean, I don't know how many of you understood some of these numbers and what's coming through here at the moment. But it's pretty confusing, and I would suggest you don't touch it with a barge pole.
Many times, but yeah. Councillor, did you have your hand up? Or?
Yeah. The one thing I was going to say is that I think whatever decision council comes to, there's got to be a recognition that once we've made that decision, it's a long-term decision, and that we're not going to be able to chop and change each year, because it's not going to achieve the outcome that we're actually discussing. So I think that is actually the key to this. Is what the decision that's come to is a 10 years decision, a long-term decision, so that you don't like any investment plan, you don't make it and then suddenly change your mind. It's a bit like having your KiwiSaver funds and seeing your balance go down. You don't make that. It's a long-term decision, and that you don't just pull your KiwiSaver funds out or make changes to things just on the basis of a very short-term set of figures.
And noting that point, it's more so if we do decide to do it, it's that timing of when we go in. But then when we do go in, we go in for a long term.
That is exactly it. It's the timing of if you do go and when you go in.
Councillor Duffy?
I agree with that, except that I sort of gathered, did I get it right in the report, that it sort of alluded to the prospect of putting investment in tranches, and perhaps a decision would be made prior to each tranche being committed, whether the timing was right for that particular tranche to be invested.
The finance and assurance decision that was made in December.
Yeah, which isn't quite the same as what Sarah was saying, but.
Well, you're staging.
It is.
Once you're in, you're in.
Yeah.
But you're just staging your approach.
Exactly.
It's a stage approach which actually provides more balance.
Yeah. Just a couple of other questions. So that loan that you managed to get at the 2.2 interest, Anne, is that, what's the term of that, and have we still got?
I didn't get it at 2.2.
Oh.
When I went to get it, I think it's averaging at 3.2, and it's over 15 and 16 years.
Right.
So I got it to 16 points.
And so it's in reserves now?
No, it's just needed for cash, because as you saw before, our loans are exceeding our reserve balances. We just need the money.
We've got a 15-year term on that.
Yeah.
And does it make any difference to LGFA with Auckland withdrawing from local government New Zealand?
No.
No,
LGNZ, that's me just confusing shit. Yeah. But no, it's good. No.
So it hasn't affected.
Nothing to do with it. It's LGFA, totally separate entity entirely. Yeah. So if we look at this slide here, this was what the Finance and Assurance Committee basically considered, which is what council now needs to consider as well. And the boxes in green is what the Finance and Assurance Committee did. So they said, where do we think we need to invest our general reserves? So the decision was, okay, well, we're going to do the balance fund, or we're going to recommend to council a balance fund. When do we do it? So there was some, I mean, you can do whatever you like, really, but the suggestion was evenly in quarterly instalments over 12 months, delay investing until changes in the market conditions, or evenly in quarterly instalments over 24 months, which is the choice they made, and then how much. I mean, because you don't have to invest the whole $33 million. You could decide to only invest a portion of it. But they said, no, let's do that full amount. So yes, the decision we're coming back today to consider is that very one from Finance and Assurance about whether we wish to continue with that or whether we wish to do something different.
Noting that if we carry on status quo, we are still going to have to borrow to fund the activity plans and everything that we're doing. We don't.
Oh yeah, I'm still going to have to borrow no matter what because I don't have any cash.
Anything new, Councillor Byers? Or?
Because, yeah, well, we've been completely disappointed that we're considering borrowing money, ratepayers' money, and putting it in the share market. I wonder if we need another motion here. The other option is to send this back to the Finance Committee and ask for them to reconsider this plan. Is there another way that we can develop a finance plan around this? I mean, we've got a lot of old people in the district who are on waiting for housing queues. We know that a lot of councils have invested reserves into housing infrastructure, for example. The only thing we've considered here is borrowing to put it in the share market. Send it back to the Finance Committee and see if they can come up with something better.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether revisiting a decision, but if you want to put that motion on there, we can see if it's supported. If you want to put that as a motion, which I'll address once we get to the motion. So is there anything else you wanted to discuss?
No, basically that's the main decision. But one thing I would say though is that if you don't wish to do it, it's just really important. I think it's good for you to have a think about, and it's good for me to know what situation or event would change that. So
I think that at the moment we're in that sort of break-even point.
Yeah, and it's just So that's just something to think about. Yep. No.
So I guess if we look at that, Councillor.
I'm just wondering whether, I mean, we heard from Wendy this morning about the rates increases, and we're having to borrow money to do these projects. Do we just need to scale things back a little bit and just, I mean, it's always nice to do all these things, but we're sort of outspending what we earn. I mean, should we be sort of just scaling things back a bit and just going, especially in this climate at the moment where the ratepayers are under a bit of financial pressure, let's just pull things back a bit. Surely we can find $750,000 within our budget.
Well, that's a long-term plan sort of process discussion, sort of outside of this process. So this process, and I guess having this policy and that flexibility around it to do either one of those three things, I mean, it's a valid point, but it's also that forms part of that long-term plan discussion as to what projects we put through, what levels of service we do, and all of that as part of that long-term plan.
This decision is very much around, though, seeing whether we can get greater returns from making an investing choice. Because if you look at that bottom line, that current situation, you're effectively saying by just investing your reserves, you are technically getting the ratepayer $431,000 more than they would have done by just leaving it in us.
Which is actually the ratepayers.
That's what it's.
I get that, but I might agree that we could probably make some of those gains within council without the risk of going to balanced funds.
Councillor Wilson?
A couple of questions, just for the timeline of it, to understand, when was the policy adopted, the new finance?
2021?
Yes.
And then when was the two funds chosen after that process?
2022 towards the end of the year, September 2022.
March 21.
So then between then, the Finance and Assurance recommendation was in December, which ultimately the same people having the conversation, but as a new councillor at the time, that was literally like the second meeting or something. So in context, it was pretty fresh on previous decisions. We've seen in the slides that December and now the environment's changed quite a bit and the numbers have changed quite a bit, and with another Finance and Assurance Committee meeting a week away, to carry on from what Dom was saying, it could be prudent to have another discussion with the chair of the Finance and Insurance Committee, just to look at whether that committee, ironically still the same group really, but have that context around whether that shift of environment, we would still make that same decision as per December. It's 6 months.
Well, I guess, I mean, the ability, I mean, we're effectively ratifying or altering that decision. We've got the opportunity to do it today. So do you see an added benefit of having another discussion different to what we can do right now? Bearing in mind, short of the chair, it's the same
Well,
people.
I guess my vote on that recommendation at that Finance and Insurance Committee was also on the basis that with further discussion, further learning, further, I guess, community sentiment and watching the market and getting better understanding that come this point when it comes to council, there's still the ability to go against that decision that otherwise, personally, I wasn't in a position to understand at that point of recommendation exactly what was going on. It was only the flexibility of the backstop of having this moment to put a halt to it if needed. That was the only thing that got my personal vote across the line on that. So yeah, I guess it depends kind of where we end up today, but we do have that opportunity to I guess with Bruce's involvement in that conversation as well, whether we want that input in this decision.
I guess my question to Anne around that is there enough time to get that into the agenda for the 7th of June when there's probably not with that agenda already?
We've got to go tomorrow.
Yeah, so unless we put it through as an urgent item, but I'm not sure.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the chairman also pointed out at that stage that this is just a long-term decision making. It's a policy decision, it's a choice, and it's a long-term decision making. So you either make it or you don't.
So the total we're looking at investing is 33 million. So that on a 24 month, over 24 months. So that's 8 payments that we would be making. So what's that? 9 million?
About 4 million times.
4 million per.
Just over 4 million.
So that's sort of the decision. It's ratifying what we've said there, and then we will be looking to put $4 million into the market.
So the way that
we could say, no, we don't want to do it at the moment. Yes, we ratified this, but no, we don't want to do it on this quarter. We're going to we'll look at the next quarter and see what's happening.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I think for me, when I'm bringing reports back to you, I will be asking you what information you would like me to provide you in order to make those decisions each time, because your market's going to be moving constantly.
So do we have a general level of comfort around, I might even just go around the room actually just to kind of see where people sit on, do we actually have an appetite to invest this money in the balance fund full stop? I'm thinking of a way to actually, because we seem to have a very mixed kind of feeling on this. So I might just go around the room to get initial thoughts on that to sort of move us onto the next level. So I'll start on my left with Councillor Menzies.
I'm comfortable with investing a portion of the money, but also subject to reviewing that decision prior to the next tranche of investment.
Thank you. Councillor Bowker.
Your Worship, no, I am not comfortable. As really indicated at that point, for me, this differential is very low. I also feel as a council, this is not, going into this sort of exposure is too much of a risk, especially at a time when the inflation is high and our ratepayers under considerable stress. Any sort of shortfall at any time would have us scrambling, looking for, avenues.
So is that a no for now or a no full stop?
No, thank you.
No full stop. Councillor Bowker.
Through your Worship, I endorse I'm comfortable with investing a portion at the moment and reviewing the next tranche.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain? A no full stop. Councillor Graney.
I'm also happy to endorse what Councillor Mendes and Councillor Rattenclaw have said.
I'm the same. I think that it's a strategy that allows for management of our funds in way that over time, the benefit for the ratepayer. I think it's misleading to say there's borrowing to invest in the share market. It's simply a strategy to manage funds well, and we've seen in the past our reserves sitting, not gaining anything over a long period of time. And also, while it's good to think that we can delay work, etc., and save our money, the fact is we've seen what happens from roading and bridging contract or work, that how we fall behind, and all it does is kick a more expensive bill to the future.
So you're supporting that stage?
Yes. And especially with the tranches the way it's planned out.
Yeah, I guess in theory I support the mixed investment into various portfolios to spread that risk. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of crystal ball gazing going on here at the moment. Although I do take on board what Councillor Wilson was also saying with regards to, I think there is a certain amount of merit in actually bringing Bruce into the discussion as well. If we could, given that it's only a week away, although I know that puts pressure on getting that report in time. The only other thing I'd say is probably on page 66, number 32. I don't know if I agree with Milford suggesting that council trance into the market.
Thank you, Councillor. You've been a chocky fish.
Thank you. Councillor Spraggan.
Yeah, I must say that I agree with it, but before the second one goes in, that we review it each time.
Well, I disagree with that. The notion of putting this money into the share market, because there's a high chance that it's going to risk this council's ability to fund their roads and bridges and other infrastructure. We're really depending on the share market increasing in a time of increased volatility, and that's not a risk that I think we should be taking with ratepayers' funds.
Thank you, Councillor.
So I'm a no.
Councillor Wilson.
In principle of the policy, at the time the policy was adopted, I understand it makes sense and it's not out of normality for local government organisations to have these kinds of financial arrangements. I am uncomfortable with assumptions of the previous 10 years with the uncertainty of what entering into the next 10 years may look like just in the current environment, as I think a lot of ratepayers and business owners and many people are at the moment. I do also worry about some of the risks and associations between the balance fund and some minor exposures in the private equity market, and think that should at least be fully disclosed and reported in ongoing reports from the fund managers if the investment goes ahead. But based on just those kind of concerns, I'm a no for now.
So a no for now, could be re-explored later on, or
yeah, see what the environment globally does.
Thank you. And last but not least, Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Worship. I understand the concern about the returns in the current marketplace. I think that the policy has merit and has my endorsement to that it should be reviewed each time we go into putting a tranche in. And so, yeah, there's still probably edging on whether I think we should be investing now, but it's the catch-22 that getting in now you might make more money up, but I do endorse the policy that it is a good option to look into it for the future, but I'm not 100% sure that I'm comfortable investing right now.
So
yeah, I'm standing on the fence really.
Yeah. so So if a question puts like before,
I endorse the policy, yeah.
so you'd be happy to do that staged approach?
Yeah, I'm happy with the staged approach. Yeah.
And
With the decision, reviewing it each time that you might be able to, manipulate or reduce down the amount that we're actually putting in to counter it. But yeah.
so looking at this, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 supporting the staged approach, which would be the majority. But I'm just going to take a quick adjournment of the meeting just to get some advice from the committee advisor around council advice. I assume you still want to put that recommendation.
Well, thank you, Worship. I wonder if we have an option there that says we say no to this. I mean, we send this back. What are the options? Can we send it back to the Finance Committee? Because I think the same thing will happen, but it needs to be sent back with some direction around.
I'll just take a couple of minutes just to have a discussion. Might actually have a cup of tea break actually. So yeah, and then if we come back and thank you for that. So we'll kick back off. So we've got our recommendations in front of us, A through to E. I'll move from the chair that accept the recommendation. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Duffy. Right. So I'll put that motion. Do we have any further discussion? Sorry.
Yeah. Motion.
Sorry, I used the wrong word there for putting the motion, sorry. Is there any further discussion on
discussion, just further to seconding it, Your Worship, I'd just like to perhaps inform the councillors that I've sort of experienced this before in my role as community trustee back in the 90s when we were in very volatile times as well. And there was a point where the cash in the bank was returning more than the investments, but I mean, over a longer period, certainly that changed markedly. So there's no reason why. I mean, we go through these economic periods. I've seen a few in my lifetime, and I don't think really that this is any different. You might think the world could fall apart tomorrow, but it's not the first time we've thought that. So, so that's partly influencing my thinking about this strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Byers.
Thank you. Just in reply to Your Worship, we have had some big economic trends unfold over the years, and Councillor Duffy's seen a few. One that's happened in Japan in the 80s, they had pretty low interest rates for a long time, and they got fairly excited. And it's taken 30 years for that market to claw its way back to where it was at the time when things were at their height. So this is a significant risk that we're taking on behalf of our ratepayers here, and it's an unnecessary risk.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chamberlain.
My question is probably through you, Rob. If we had an event like Gabrielle, if we go ahead and borrow this money now, and we have to have a weather event that we have to sort out a lot of stuff, how does that affect our borrowing in a time of crisis, or future borrowing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a really good point. And in fact, our financial strategy sets out that there's headroom within our borrowing strategy to actually borrow funds for that event. And there is sufficient at this stage, I would presume, to still do that, as well as, of course, we rely on these government funds.
What are you calling headroom?
To consider it. Oh, look, I'd have to go back and grab it, but I don't know, it's probably about 80, oh God, no, look, I need to just go in and have a look. See if I can find it here.
I'll just while
carry on.
We'll move to another question, then we can go on to that if you're happy with that.
I think it's worthy for people to consider that.
Yeah. Any other discussion? While Ian's having a look. Is it something that you can find relatively quickly in, or
just trying to see if hopefully we've got the long-term plan sitting on.
From memory, it was a reasonable amount.
It is. I can remember the graph, so I can show you the graph. But
20 million
of that much.
Well,
yeah. The last workshop, and it was.
Hang on, I might just even have it here.
the review of market conditions, whether that includes reviewing the balance funds make up at the time with the fund managers, whether that ties in with their reporting ability.
I just say that as part of market conditions, it's our council. You can find it easily when there's no pressure, right?
Yeah. Probably blow the computer system up just as well. We've got plenty of help at the back.
So if there's no further discussion while we're waiting on that, I'll put the motion and ask all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? No. Do you want to just raise your hands those that are against?
So you want your dissenting votes recorded?
Yes, please.
Four. So with 4 against and the rest 4, they'll declare that motion carried. And thank you for a very good. Have you got the answer there?
Yeah, Nicole, very kindly. So I've got told to check my emails. Between 85 and 130 million. So that's where our debt is projected to go, and that's the capacity that we've got. So between those two graphs, like I said, go much. So it's between 85 and 130 million.
Thank you, and thank you once again, and thank you for all the work that you put into that, Anne. That was a very good explanation with all that. So much appreciated. We now have on page 77, 7.4, the management report. I believe the Chief Executive to my left will speak to this one.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a great pleasure to provide the management report for you. As is normal, it's a snapshot of things from across the organisation over the last period. Some of the team are here to answer specific questions, and I would recommend to His Worship that later on when I've finished that the A3s be gone through one by one. But I just want to touch on the context in which we are, or you are actually going to be making a long-term plan decision or decisions. And you've already covered the report this morning around the timetable and the recognition that actually a long-term plan is a council responsibility. It's one of the few things that you can't delegate away under the Local Government Act. And there's also another requirement in the Act that you must have an LTP to apply. One of the challenges, though, is that the Three Waters reform has been changed. We know that it's intended to be changed, but the legislation to do that hasn't yet been presented to the House. So we're in a situation that the first Act is in place. That was approximately November last year. Immediately, a second bill was presented which amended the first Act, and that was added to with another bill around, in effect, providing some sort of market regulation around pricing that the Three Waters entities would be required to adhere to, with the possible provision of the regulator. Council submitted on those bills in approximately March, April, it's a bit hazy now. And then while the Select Committee's been away considering those submissions, government's announced that they're rethink around the whole Three Waters thing as well as the main thing. But they will not present that bill to the House until the Select Committees come back and they'll tidy up those bits first. That means that it's going to be incredibly short time for the rethink to be put in draft legislation presented and then run through the House and run through the Select Committee. The challenge for us, though, and for you, is that we don't know at the moment what it is that we are going to be consulting on when it comes to the Three Waters assets. Now, we can see reasonably clearly that council is going to be expected to keep hold of them for at least 2 years. As the law stands at the moment, we can't actually put that in the LTP because the law says you're not allowed to put them in the LTP because that's what the last act. So we will be preparing an LTP with quite a lot of uncertainty around what it is that we're actually consulting on. And so in here where I'm mentioning that we are awaiting both the legislation and the associated guidance that's expected from DIA and the Office of the Auditor General around how to handle these matters in a long-term plan. So from my point of view, it's very unclear to me what it is that we would put in the LTP around what decisions that we are consulting on. If in effect we would be required to consult on something over which in fact we don't have any choice. So the only potential choice that I can understand at the moment is whether council might like to go earlier into some sort of whatever the Southland District Council, I think it's now called. But we don't even know about that. So I just have to say it's a very challenging set of circumstances under which to be generating a long-term plan, and I think we're all going to have our patience tested over the months ahead. There's plenty of other exciting things happening, and it's in the budget. A very, 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 very small line of our budget, the government's budget, was to reopen potential investigations of alternative energy supply for Rakiura Stewart Island. Now, that is exceptionally welcome. No actual money, but at least a recognition that the current situation is unsustainable for council or for the islanders. So we certainly welcome that. And in the nature of things being really dynamic, even as we've been in here, I've just had notification that the freedom camping bylaws has just changed, and that people will be able to freedom camp only on local authority land if they have certified self-contained vehicles. And changes around certifying self-contained vehicles include that vehicles with a portable toilet are no longer able to be certified as self-contained. Now, given that, now that's a good tidy up, nice to have that clarity. There's changes to infringement fees and enforcement. But remember, that's another activity that council gets involved in terms of that. And there's a little provision I note in here that says this doesn't apply to people that are homeless. So great to have some clarity. Hard to yet at this stage figure out what the implications will be for that relatively small but complicated area that the team has to look at. At this stage, I'd just like to really offer the opportunity for questions, and I will then defer them happily to the wise team along here.
Thank you, Cameron. Any questions, Councillor Graney?
Yeah, two questions off the back of that. Given the comments around Three Waters, and knowing that we're going into a general election, generally there's no activity in government from August, generally. And then once the new government's formed, then generally there's still not a lot of activity until February. So is what you're indicating to the table that we will have to be making, or we have to be looking at those three waters and LTP related discussions before August. Given it's likely to be no activity.
Look, my understanding is that government is confident that they will have passed the legislation in time for the House to rise. What we don't know is what that legislation is going to say, and we've been reasonably active on your behalf in pointing out to the Minister's Office and DIA that actually personally, I'm not actually keen to generate a long-term plan that has big patches of uncertainty in it. We found ourselves in a similar situation last time around both change, but we still had to show them in the remembering that there's a requirement to carry out 30 years for infrastructure. It's not just a trivial exercise. And then we had that last minute roading. Really what we are looking for is to say, if you want to tidy up some of the stuff and give us a clue, give all the councils a clue about how to handle the LTPs, it would be really good to have it in the draft legislation and not rely on the committee process trying to fix it. Or worse, come back at the end and say, yeah, we now hear from you, we realise there's an inconsistency here, but we don't have enough legislative time in the House to fix it.
Meanwhile, we have to carry on with the long-term planning process and somehow plan around all that uncertainty, which is...
But if I could, we've met now with the head of what would have been Entity D, which is essentially the South Island, and DIA representatives and made this point very strongly, and also to DIA directly. So that's why I'm mentioning in here that we're looking forward to some guidance. What we've actually been asking for is that if there are elements of uncertainty that are created by government policy around this, that actually maybe we wouldn't need to be audited quite so rigorously and expensively around that, or we could actually indicate something and say that there is no opportunity to actually consult on this matter because it's no longer for us.
Thank you. And through your worship, my second question is just that change to the freedom camping law. What's the effective date of that? And does it is there a definition of homelessness and any potential for there to be a loophole that people might be able to get through in that regard?
If I may answer the second one first, I don't know. Those changes I was telling you about will take effect after royal assent. So basically this indication that I've got from MB is that it's just passed through the House, it must have gone through yesterday. Once it's got royal assent, then they'll be in place. They're indicating that there'll be guidance provided around implementation of this. I don't really want to focus on it unduly. I'm just trying to give a sense of just how many things are changing all the time, which is on us as an organisation. So yes, the RMA reform program is still believed to be on track. But
So through you, Your Worship, that will require us to tidy up the bylaw, is essentially what you're indicating.
Well, it'll probably trump our bylaw, I'd imagine.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But in order to then be consistent, like so many things, they've brought to us back to the table to ensure consistency between local government legislation and central government legislation.
Grant, did you want to?
I just add I think another little complication to what you're talking about.
Do I come further forward to it?
Another complication to that, what you've been talking about, Cameron, is the DIA require us to seek significant decisions for our big projects that are potentially around or over the $10 million mark. Now, there's only a couple that are coming up, potentially the 23, 24, 24, 25 period. So we're probably going to have another master saying yes or no to some of those projects. I think that's just, it would add another complication, not to the smaller projects, but certainly to the larger ones. Possibly the Manapori water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant in Eastern Bush, which are not far away. And they may tell us to pull back for whatever reason. They may not, but just you need to know that.
Yeah, so we've actually got the NTU amongst everything that we're doing right now, and yeah. Did you want to?
Nothing like having two bosses.
It was an excellent reminder. Yes, the NTU already has control over your and I have a feeling that also includes ratifying the annual plan and the LTP, as well as, because they would regard that as a significant decision, even though it's consistent with the long-term plan. So, as well as the timetable you've heard this morning, there are a whole lot of other steps that around Three Waters we would have to seek specific approval from the NTU, the National Transition Unit, which sits within DIA.
Noting that we all actually declare a vote to our ratepayers, not to the NTU. That frustrates me. Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question around, and you referred to it, Cameron, in your comments around the auditor process, and obviously we've got to have things done in time in order for that to occur. Has there been communication from the auditor in terms of expectations with respect to the Three Waters legislation? And if not, when might we expect it, in order that we're able to try and frame that into our process effectively?
Excellent question, thank you. We understand that this has been raised with the auditor, with the Auditor General, and we understand that they are likely to give some advice. I'm afraid I'm not aware of that timetable. But you know, we're not the only council in that situation, clearly, and so we've been raising it strongly. Just saying, look, give us some clarity so that we can make the long-term planning process as worthwhile. Because, as you well understand, it's an exceptionally expensive process. You think about the time that you will be committing into the workshop in terms of the decision making. You think about all of the team having to go back through all those 30-year plans. It's a massive job, and then of course it's in effect that it's agreement with the community about this is what the strategy around how we're going to handle all the infrastructure, and this is the strategy around how it's funded and paid for, and then it's consulted on. So this is your agreement in effect with the community, so it's a big deal. Every 3 years this comes in on top of normal running of the organisation. So given how important it is, I just really hope that we get some of that guidance sooner rather than later, because we want to make sure that that's not a waste of effort.
That's Brian.
Through you, Worship, just based on that news that we just received around the freedom camping legislation, Cameron, I would like to have thought that there would have been provision made around that new legislation which would allow council-owned assets in the forms of those reserves to allow us to realise some opportunity to be able to make some money from those council-owned assets. So, while we have a massive tourism industry, and that tourism industry, as well as our local people, use those assets, I think we've missed a trick there. We invest a lot into our toilets, our public toilets, and our infrastructure. Yet, I think we should have opened that up to maybe the private sector. The private sector comes in and leases that property off us for a peppercorn rental, and takes the revenue accordingly through a user-pay system. So I'd just like to think that this kind of one-dimensional approach is something that we need to look at, and I think we need to capitalise on it.
unfortunately, we don't have any say in what gets dealt to us, but yeah, it's another example of that broad brush approach where we don't actually have the say or control over our own.
Well, we need to put pressure on, right, that's part of our job. Put pressure on those, they're our assets, they're our people's assets, and I think we could utilise them a bit better. Yep.
Right, I'll invite the program delivery person or team up to the table for your A3. Brendan.
Good morning, councillors. Through you, Your Worship. I'll take the report as read, but certainly highlight some of the points from the report and open it up for any questions at the end. So, this activity summary report is up until April. So the figures to April indicate we've delivered approximately 46% of the annual plan, so just over 19 million. That is the adjusted annual plan, so percentage against the adjusted annual plan. As I've previously indicated, the annual plan budget currently exceeds the capacity of the program delivery teams, and as I've said in the past, a capital delivery of around that 30 to 35 million would be more appropriate. We're seeing around about a 25% on average increase in, in project budgets. So that is across the board. Obviously, there's been some significant increases in steel and building supplies, but that sort of 25% is seen as an average across the board. So that is, in some cases, having an effect on projects where we need to, in some cases, reduce scopes or contingencies are certainly being extinguished. And we're still utilising quantity surveys to confirm that we have got sensible budgets. QS teams obviously have their finger on the pulse. That's what they do. That's their bread and butter. So certainly still utilising the QS estimators for some of those larger projects to make sure that our budgets are relevant. And just to note that all projects within the TIF application have now been completed. The Manapuri Te Aneo, TIF View Street car park, all the toilets and boat ramps and everything are now complete. The activity overview gives a snapshot of some of those projects that we have completed and some projects that have just started or are about to start. The risk matrix, there hasn't been a lot of change in that risk matrix there, so that remains probably quite static. In the health and safety space, we've completed, as the project delivery team, 29 audits or safety observations, and that is between February and April for the team. In the environmental space, we're still having some issues around affected party approvals, and just to note that when we ask for an affected party approval, there is no statutory time frame bound by those respondents to respond to council in what would be classed as a reasonable time frame. So we do have a process that we can go down if we're in discussions with Environment Southland where we've given affected party or requested affected party approval and they're not forthcoming. We can then go down and request that it goes to either a limited notifiable or a full notifiable. So yeah, just wanted to point that out. So what you'll probably see as new is up in the top right hand corner. We've changed what was words and figures and now put it into a nice, easy to look at graph, and that basically is just indicating, as I said, that sort of 46% delivered against the total program, and that then splits out into the separable teams there. So yeah, it just makes it a little bit easier to see perhaps where we need a little bit of horsepower, and in talking to the asset managers, there is some projects that, although the obviously end of financial year cut-off is 30 June, they will be completed, perhaps very early in the new financial year, so into July and August. So, I guess missing that cut-off for the financial year per se, but yeah, fairly close. So, I guess at this stage, I'll just open it up for any questions.
Just a
comment, I guess, on that graph. Would it be worthwhile stacking the blue and the light blue and the orange together to give a comparison against actuals versus actuals and plans versus the budgeted? Because I've sort of been stacking it in my head, trying to look where it sort of lines up. I don't know if it's easily done, but are there any other questions from the floor? Councillor Chamberlain?
Just regarding the Queen's Reach boat ramp repairs, local jet boat operators aren't particularly happy with what's been done there.
Okay. I'll perhaps catch up with you and just find out a little bit more detail about that. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Menzies?
Thank you. It's just occurring to me really as you're talking that some of these projects, the other 54%, will be looked at in completion in July, August, hopefully, although we haven't got that detail with us. But that has an impact on delivery for the following year.
Absolutely.
And at some stage we'll get information through to us on that impact, because it just keeps rolling on. We've talked about this before, but the detail of it would be good to know, so we're in a position that we're not having a similar discussion at the end of the next financial year.
Absolutely.
Just checking with Brendan, in July and August, the programme's not going, don't raise your hopes that everything will get done, but what Brendan's saying is it'll look better than this. Is that right? Yes.
I think having that information to look at and absorb allows us then to make informed decisions ahead for next year.
Well, thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. And we'll move on to the transport.
Thank you, Richard. Morning, councillors. So a bit like the previous report, I'll take it as read, but I'll still take the opportunity to highlight just a couple of points. One is probably the sealed road resurfacing contract. We're pretty much done for the season, but really highlighting, I suppose, the percentage we managed to complete within the available budgets, and just really highlighting some of the ongoing discussions we've had around cost increases and impacts on works programs. The other aspect is around bridge renewals, just maybe more for clarity in terms of the practical completion aspect and what that means. So generally when we've completed a project, it'll reach a stage where it's practically complete, and we'll issue a practical completion certificate, acknowledging that the project's completing and therefore can practically be completed, but then goes into a what we term a defects liability period, effectively a warranty period, that there's no underlying issues that may occur over a 12 or 24 month period that may need to be remedied by the contractor. So just a bit of an explanation around the difference between those, that even though it's practically complete, there's still a warranty period for a lot of these projects to address defects or even minor defects that may need to be addressed. The other aspect is around the budgets. We're obviously behind, as some of the previous discussion, particularly the bridge area. We had those delays in but we're progressing that quite rapidly at the moment in terms of the next program and how we procure those for the up and coming season to utmost to deliver on the program of last year or this year's and next year's, and trying to really get ahead of that to ensure that we deliver. And then amongst that, the major priority is actually looking at the long-term plan and our activity plans and implications of the level of service and budget, so we can have good informed discussion about what the next 3 to 30 years look like. But that's a major focus for us, to be able to have good informed discussion around that. The last sort of links back with our labour in it is really from a risk point of view, it is really those budgets and cost increases that's the biggest risk at the moment, and we see that continuing. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Hartley. Do we have any questions for Councillor Menzies?
It's not a question, but more a comment. Just to note, I quite enjoy reading the Waimea Express and the Central Times, is it called? Just to, you see the responsiveness of the operators out there to what's happening in the community. I think all those trees that fell over along the Mavora Lakes area, and they're out there the next day, including working on a Saturday, I think, as a team to clear that. And I don't think we necessarily see that happening in our community, and the great job that they're doing.
All the councillors subscribe to those. Does everyone get them?
The one that's missing is the 5O contract.
So about Councillor Chamberlain and Councillor Collins.
Through you, Rob. It was just the guy out to it every way, rang up with the complaint, and I think Hartley, you went and had looked at it, and then he rang me back saying there's a digger that's just gone past that bit of work that needed to be wanted done. So is there some way of loading the jobs on a website that all the contractors can see? So, I mean, this is a classic case that this digger drove right past the work that was needing done, but rather than bringing a digger in from somewhere else, if that job had been on a website or a job list that all contractors can see, so, well, I'm going to be in the area or going past that. Is there something like that gets done, or a process that
we don't have a process in terms of how that's publicly sort of available. As there is a risk that we need to balance off with, get flooded with requests and then starts impacting on our works program. I suppose a good example is even our grader beats and normal requests for services that we may get in. The expectation sometimes of, well, the graders on this road will jump across to another road. What that end up, we become very inefficient by doing that, and we start getting behind on the works program. So it's a bit of a balancing act with that, but also taking on, I suppose, private work or work that might be associated with a private work that somebody should be undertaking first. So yes, while the grader or the excavator might be going past, actually are we taking on liabilities that aren't necessarily associated with council work? So I suppose what I'm trying to highlight, there's a risk there that we become inundated with requests and impacts, and how we manage that from a broader works program and the resource required to manage that.
I'm not saying you put up all jobs, but I didn't go and look at what Tom Fowler had wanted done, but when the digger went past it, if the contractor had known some sort of system.
Well, the alliance system, this is from my experience in Northern Southland, is normally quite responsive. The RFF system would normally go through straight to that alliance. So I guess there is a chance that that RFS had been lodged and we've gone to the alliance manager and he knew that the digger was going. So I think there is the opportunity under the current system for that to happen. Although I guess there's a timing thing of where. But would I be correct in saying that alliance system that we've got is relatively responsive for that sort of thing?
Yes, I would say it is. I think that specific example was a different operator compared to the alliance operator, so we wouldn't necessarily know private individuals carrying out work and how to track that.
Some just do work for you. So the people, the contractors that you've got that are certified to work for council, if they were notified that the jobs are out there, the ones that you want, and if someone was going past, they could do them. But
short answer is no, we don't have it public available. And I mean, it's something that could be looked at, but it will come at a cost. Somebody would have to upload that information on a system, keep that database up to date. At the moment, we don't have the resource to do something like that. It would be an additional cost and additional resource if we wanted to go down that line.
So was there an through your worship, was there an RFS budget?
No, I know Hartley went. It wasn't. He contacted her.
That's probably a bit detailed, but I think it goes to an adjacent landowner and the Land Drainage Act, not for the road per se.
So Councillor O'Brien and then Councillor Menzies.
It probably dovetails into Councillor Chambers' question really with regards to a database. You mentioned before about having that knowledge of that certificate of compliance and what this is on, for example, at bridges. Is there any value, and this may already be the case, for having that information available to the public, so that when the questions are asked by the ratepayers around the conditions of bridges, they can actually see, this is what the council are doing, this is what the engineers are doing, this is where we are today. This is the class of vehicle, as an example, that can use this particular resource, so that we're not having the discussions over and over again where people come in and say, well, you are preempting what we should do with this particular asset. Is there a way that we can streamline that and make it more efficient, similar to what I guess Derek was talking about? Or do we that comes at a cost, or is there an existing kind of structure in place?
So some of it's quite easy. The bridge restrictions, we've already got that on our website, so it is available. As we discussed with the bridge report, that's quite easy. We're stucking that straight out of our asset management system. But the other aspects will come at a cost. The biggest challenge, our investors again, is the constant nature and change of those requests, and then updating our works programs to adjust that change in nature. And it's not just adjusting our work programs, then there's somebody having to update the system that informs everybody of that. So it's flow and effects. The more systems we're trying to keep up to date and advise, the bigger the resource input.
So what it come back to, I think we might have had this discussion relatively recently around going, well, you can go on an IT sort of setup, or you can just simply say, well, here's something physically on the bridge to say, well, this is the tier weight, this is the date that it was inspected, blah, 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 and go, do we do that as well, or is that an alternative?
So for the bridges, with the bridge report, annually we'll go and update any changes. So it's a physical sign that's in place. And then subsequent to that, we also update our website so it reflects those changes.
Okay. I guess something like a QR code or something that could be on the bridge posting sign that could link, so if information changes on the website that links to, something like that would be a relatively...
Not physically updated as required on an annual basis. If there's a change, we update it physically.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Menzies?
Just a further comment in relation to Councillor Chambers' question. I just, when you read the Waimea Express and the Central Times, you see them pulling off crews when they're working close by to come down and turn to another matter of emergency. And we don't always know that, the digger's going past, but we don't know what they're going to. And that matter may be classed as more urgent. So it was just thank you.
Well, thank you, Hartley, and I'll, Councillor Baker.
Just one question, Hartley. In the mitigation actions on the pavement damage to the forestry traffic, when you say pursue operator, is this something we are already doing?
In terms of the forestry?
Yeah, the actions we pursue operators for cost directly. So is there something in the works?
That's correct. We do that already. If we know where the operator, particularly if it's at the end of the roading network and there's limited other users, it's basically might be one farmer that permanently uses that road, and then there's a forestry block at the end of it that they start logging, harvesting, and there's damage to that. We have a discussion with them, cease operations, or we look at them paying for the cost of having to try and keep that road up to suitable standard.
Is this easy enough to get this money out? When you say pursue, I'm just wondering at the tone.
Yeah, it has to date. We've been reasonably successful with it, where we can pin it down, or get the operators to supply the rock or some sort of arrangement that's equitable. They don't obviously like parting too much with. The argument is often, well, we pay our rates and council should be looking after the road, and that's fine from a standard grading point of view, and we might do some preemptive work, such as remetalling the road. We know that there's going to be some logging operation, but it's where it becomes more than just wear and tear on the road, and particularly in adverse weather conditions when they continue trying to log, when you do have soft spots starting to occur in the road and the road is deteriorating, that's when we hasten after them.
Thank you. Well, thanks for that, Hartley, and we'll move on to the next one, which is Three Waters. What do we need to call it? Affordable waters?
Morning, Council, through you, Rob. I will take the report as read. One comment, just probably following on from Hartley's comments about the market. I've had a number of the contractors in the drainage market at the moment coming to us saying that their work is starting to slow down a little bit. I think it's probably a really good sign for us going into our 23-24 year with projects still to go to market. I can't control, I don't think, obviously the material costs will be what the material costs are, but I think we could be in for a little bit of good pricing out of the contractors. So that's just I can't guarantee that, but that's just a wee bit of good news. And our Riversdale project, which is underway now, come in under our budget. So you haven't heard that in transport for a wee while. So that's just a wee bit of good news, I think. And can I just make some comments about your comments to Hartley about programming? My background is 6 years with civil work, civil construction, which was Downer, 15 years with Fulton Hogan, 10 years regional manager, 10 years with South Road as a regional manager. The horsepower that goes into programming is incredible. It's a continuum. Boards with projects on it, programs with projects on it. It's human, so that the odd thing might get missed, and it's a very fluid situation with guys turning up to work, guys not turning up to work, plant breakdowns, emergencies, etc., etc. But don't underestimate the amount of work that's getting done in those alliance offices. And same in Three Waters, when stuff comes in, there's a big bit of horsepower goes into programming, and always trying to fit in stuff as economically as possible. We're not perfect, but there's a lot of work goes into it.
It wasn't criticism.
Just there's a lot of work, and if you went into like the Alliance office in Winton, Hartley's roading transport guys operate, you'll see stuff on whiteboards for Africa with critical, not so critical, not very critical at all type scenario. So that's just my experience. There's a lot of work goes into it.
Thank you for that, Grant. Really good to start with some good news too. We'll hold you to the next time as well.
We'll see. Yeah, I'm feeling confident.
Do we have any questions for Grant?
Thank you. And Grant, I'm thinking just in that stormwater expenditure, that was an under budget figure, not a variance of 17% to the contrary.
Yeah, we are under budget. Yeah, and that's around conditioning, but we have got some work happening in the next few weeks that will start clicking.
The variance just needed brackets around.
Oh, sorry. Oh, right. Yes, it did too. That'll be good. I won't blame Leslie.
Better result than.
we are intending to spend a chunk of that money.
So it's like 34%.
Yes.
Are there any further questions for Grant? Looks like you're getting off the hook easily. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Grant. I'm just trying to follow up on a question on behalf of a member of the Ardnassa Community Board, just regarding the resource consent applications for the. Actually, it featured in the first edition. I'm not sure if it's what relates to this A3 on the resource consent extensions, but it was regarding the Balfour and the Lumsden drinking water resource consent.
Balfour wastewater and Lumsden.
What was that the one that was in the recent first edition with the costs around kind of 50,000?
Yeah,
per one. And is that in consent application fees, or is that
application? We generally you have to use consultants with specialist knowledge for consents. It's very complicated, so we use a number of consultants. So it's engaging them to do the consent work, and that sort of leads to the design work.
And it's pretty much the same price for each consent budgeted?
Generally.
Is that that budget got a bit of headroom, or is that going to be tight?
It'll be tight. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you for that, Councillor Byers.
Oh, thank you, Worship. Thank you, Grant. I was just wondering, can we get some information too on the Winton workshop, whatever that happened, what the latest is on that?
The Winton wastewater treatment plant upgrade.
Yes.
I'll find out exactly where that's at. I didn't attend, but I'll check the chief and see where that's at.
Thanks, Grant. And I'll hand over to the forestry one and
Morning, councillors. Good morning, Your Worship. Through Your Worship, I'll take the forest report as read. Summary is Ojai is tracking within 5% of its income and expenditure. Diplin will likely be deferred, as will Ojai Douglas Fir, so some of that will be deferred until the market improves. And we have a fixed price offer against those logs, which is hedging our risk, ensuring that we're vulnerable to the spot price market, which is dipping away. So, any questions or queries in relation to that?
Thanks, that's Stu. Any questions from the floor? Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think you just answered my question, Stuart. I had some feedback that the log market wasn't paying for the production or the processing. So you've put on hold a couple of projects, but you're still making some money in Ojai.
That's correct. We had a fixed price offer in the contract, so that if the price of logs dipped, IFS are held to that price. In this case, this contract is working very well in that regard. It does mean that we lengthen our harvesting time, so that IFS have the ability to supply the export market at a reduced rate, which is how they hedge their risk in relation to that of price and supply.
So does that have an impact on the cost of harvest for us? Or?
No, it's a good question. We have one of the considerations was continuing to harvest and looking at slightly reduced cost of that fixed price, but the cost of stopping harvesting, disestablishing the harvesting machinery, and re-establishing that, establishing a new contract, likely at a higher rate per tonne, was a greater risk and greater cost than continuing with the fixed price offer and maintaining a budget within 5%.
Thank you. Just while we've got Stuart here, we had a chap, you wouldn't have heard the chap that came in earlier, talked about biochar. No. Sort of partially burnt wood that's got some wonderful properties, good across the soil. He talked about forestry slash being a possibility for turning into this biochar.
We've always got a listening ear, Councillor Byers. So I'll take some time to look at that and come back to you, probably through Jane with that. Yeah.
Oh, that's all right. Don't spend too much time on it, but I just thought there's an issue or concern around the slash, and I thought, well, we've got a concern that might be something worth looking at.
Could be a valid use of it, yeah. Yeah, I shared the same thoughts when you were presenting. Councillor Wilson? Sure. Let's do it. I noticed in the media there was the comment around the forestry slash bond. That was a national first. But I couldn't see anything in the A3. Have you got any context around how that?
Certainly can. Yeah. So the harvesting contract, I took a wider scope with that and looked at all of the performance measures that a good harvesting contractor should have. And it wasn't too far from the structure we would typically put against the civil works contract. So it's in line with the rest of our contracts around bonding. It just involved a bit of negotiation between IFS, Woodlands Pacific, the Institute of Forestry, and we came to what we thought was the best standard, or setting the standard.
Should that be written into the 25 forestry management plan as a?
They're held to that because those obligations are held within the current contract. So yeah, they're held to that for whatever work they do with us.
Councillor O'Brien?
Through you, Your Worship. Stuart, it says that the Dipton Forest is being planned for harvesting this coming month. Is the Dipton Forest subject to the same fixed price that Ojai is subjected to?
Yeah, it is. It is. So it was planned for May. It'll be deferred, and it's at a different location. So you got a logistics component to that coming into your risk profile, especially around obviously the budget. So we don't want to be there. Yeah.
Based on the risks associated with that.
Yep.
That location, what you said before about saying if we move everything.
Yep.
Yeah. So based on that, can you give us an idea of when the planning for that harvesting of the Dippin forest might occur?
It's likely to be the end of this year. I think we're going to see further dipping of the export price market at the wharf, both in China and here. So we're probably hearing around about November is the start time for kicking back in. You'll see a bit more dipping in the log market, I think. That's what I'm hearing.
I guess there's synergies with this with our previous discussion around the long-term. I mean, this is ultimately an investment in the market and taking that long-term approach, and it's good to see that we're actually managing those risks as they're coming in. Councillor Duffy.
Yes, thank you. Sea grant in the OHI, the income and expenditure, does that expenditure include the replanting?
No.
Sorry, not grant, Stuart. Yeah, it doesn't.
It's a separate contract.
Okay.
It's a civil culture and maintenance management contract.
Councillor Dunbar.
Just a quick question, if I may. From what I see, the log prices have fallen something, figures vary between 8 to 12 to 14%. What sort of trigger is our benchmark like? How much? Because it seems to be if we can't absorb 12%, just out of curiosity, what is our trigger that if it falls below this, what is our break even?
Well, it depends on the grade in the market. It's put to.
Say for these, the ones that we are not harvesting right now.
Can you repeat that, please?
Say for the ones like the Dipton one that we are not harvesting right now, what grade are those?
I don't have that with me right now. Yeah, they fall.
I'll touch base with you later.
Yes, the spot price is up to 20%, 27%, somewhere between 20 to 27% across most grades. The spot market is, yes, 20% less than where we are with our fixed price. So you can see the benefit there we're getting against some of those log grades. It's huge. Yeah, so we're on the winning side of that. And we analyse that on a 2-week basis. The contract is very transparent. We can see every decision made, how the market's responding to that, what sawmill is taking logs at which price and which quantity, and that leads into what decisions we make for the next 2 weeks. So it's very transparent now, and we're right on top of that decision making.
Thank you very much, Judy. See, Mark's actually come to the table, so I'll let you off the hook and I'll invite community leaders up. Thank you once again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a warning. This afternoon. I'll take this report as read and just point out a couple of things, mainly around the underspend in the open spaces operational expenditure, which is largely due to lack of resource in my team. I had one staff member off for 5 months, and I've lost a planner that we haven't been able to replace. So that underspend in that operational budget is basically due to that and our inability to deliver on the open spaces project. Some good news is we have now got 3 contracts in place. We've got a playground contract in place, we've got a tree contract in place, and we've got a program maintenance contract in place. So since those contracts are now in place, we will be seeing a reduction in some of those underspends within our budgets. Following on from some of the previous conversations about delivery of work, we need to look at our planning in the future and coming up with a program of works, preferably over the 3-year time frame of an LTP. If we continue to try and deliver works within 1 year, we're always going to fail. So we need to look at how we move forward with the next LTP and how we propose to deliver our projects through that period of time. Unfortunately, we tend to be operating in a 3-year cycle with the local government elections. which don't align with our long-term plan. So we're having to go back and every 3 years revisit what we did. So we're back at the start now, working through this process when we're always going to be behind the 8 ball. So moving forward, I hope we can come up with a plan to help us deliver and do our business a whole lot easier. But on that note, happy to take questions.
I think that alignment's very important, and it'll make everyone's lives easier from elected members to staff to the ratepayers as well. Do we have any questions, Councillor Graney?
Through you, Worship. Like I know that we've talked about the toilets before, and it's stated here that the contracts are all running as per the service level agreements. I'm just wondering though about those opening hours for Tiana, and whether any. I'm not sure when that contract's up for renewal or discussion.
The contract's up for renewal at the end of 2024. What we are planning to do is bring a paper to council to make a decision on whether or not we continue to charge for that toilet. At which point in time, if the decision is we no longer need to charge for the toilet, we can look at the opening hours then.
Can I request that paper goes to the community board first and comes up to get their feedback, or if that's not already part of
it has been raised by the community board.
Right, okay, cool.
So yes.
It's the reason I'm sort of raising it through council is the concern around in particular actually more the availability of the showers just as much as the toilets, because people generally, if they're probably applies to the summer season more than the winter season, but they're looking to take a shower before they go to Milford Sound. But the things hasn't been until 9:30, and then same closed at 4. And so that's before people have come back from Milford Sound. So it's just that time frame doesn't kind of work for the foot traffic that's actually.
The lake's probably a bit cold.
Just a week. Might have dark itch as well.
Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thinking back, just to clarify, the tree maintenance contract and the playground contract that you've awarded, are they district-wide?
Yes. Yes, the tree maintenance contract went to Esplin, and the playground contract went to Amenity Services. So they're based in Tiana.
Councillor Keys, do you? No further questions? Oh, thank you very much for that, Matt.
Thank you, Your Worship.
That was a very good A3, so I thought that discussion. It might almost be worth breaking from. Oh, sorry. Actually, my wise counsel to my left, we need to actually receive the report.
Through you, Worship, I just had a couple of additional questions on that report. The book bus, I was just interested in the comments around the book bus and on which page it's on specifically, but I was just wondering, if there are ongoing issues, what's the end of life of that vehicle? Is there any information around that?
I can help with that. So in regards to the book bus, we are anticipating with a long-term plan to have a proposal up to a new way of doing that. We've also, through the investigation that's occurred to date with the community, it's obvious that we can deliver that service with in a different style, but still with it being a portable style, but maybe not necessarily a big bus or the bus of that size. So we are looking to bring something through the long-term plan.
Page 81, if anyone's looking.
And then through your worship, just another question, and again, might not be able to answer this, and sorry, I did read my papers quite late last night, so I didn't have a chance to email. There was just a comment that 14 food premises had surrendered their registrations. I just wondered, quite interested in what the reasons for it. Was it COVID related, or is it?
We'll have to take that one away and come back to you.
Fine. Yeah, no problem. As I say, it was a question I know I should have asked beforehand.
So you happy to receive that report? Move that the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor O'Brien, all in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? That is carried. Thank you very much, and thanks again for your team. And on that note, I will break for lunch, and we can come back here at 10 to 1. Removing those two from the leave of absence so that she can teams in remotely. So is someone happy
And
to...
if it doesn't work?
And if it doesn't work, we can just do it as an apology at the time. So is someone happy to move that? Thank you, Councillor Keys. Second to Councillor Ravenport. All in favour? Anyone against? Totally not. Carried. Thank you. Okay, so we now have a workshop, and I'll hand over to Jane, Teresa and Fred.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, Teresa and I are here today just to talk about a number of the policies that the strategy and policy team are reviewing at the moment. So we're using this workshop as an opportunity to run you through the review process, give you a bit of background to the policies and any issues that you might need speaking about, and also to gather any feedback from yourselves in terms of informing final drafts before they come back to you for consultation, sign off. So usually we bring policies and bylaws up to you one at a time to consider. Over the last year, we've tried to change up how we're actually going out. We're aware that the community is suffering a bit of consultation fatigue. So we're looking at trying to find new ways that we can engage with the community and also get input from them into some of these drafts that are then going out. So, in terms of what we've done, at the end of last year, we bundled a number of policies and bylaws together with an aim to review and consult on them concurrently. So we took them to community boards in December, and we created a Make It Stick page so that the wider community had chance to give input to the drafts. Well, actually not to the drafts, but to the current policies. And that was a very successful process. We ran that Make It Stick page from December through till February. We got 76 responses, so that was fabulous in terms of helping inform the drafts. We've since actually separated out the bylaws from the policy. The bylaws are still in the process of being reviewed. They just are a more complex piece of work and will take longer to do, and we didn't want to run the risk of holding up the process. So they are running, it's all under review, but we're at the moment, Teresa and I are here to talk to you about four policies that we're currently looking at. So I'm going to start off with I'm going to just go back actually. I should have looked at the slide rather than just talk to you. Just letting you know where we are in that process. Okay, so we are currently at the drafting stage. We've done pre-engagement with community boards and key stakeholders. So this is where we're at. We're going to be coming back to you with a statement of proposal in July, end of June, sorry, and then looking at public consultation mid-July onwards. Okay, so just going into the actual policy itself. Oh, I'm having all sorts of fun here. Right, the dangerous, affected and sanitary buildings policy, this is one I'm looking at the moment. So in terms of what does the policy do, it sets out the approach that Council is going to take in terms of identifying and dealing with any buildings that are assessed as dangerous or unsanitary, and also any buildings that might be affected by those. So it's really, the policy is really focused on making sure that people can live and work in buildings safely. The Council is responsible for managing this policy through the Building Act, and so it outlines how Council will work with owners in terms of finding any practical options in terms of what's available to them to resolve whatever issue they've identified. So heritage buildings are also dealt with within the policy, and they're assessed in the same way as any other dangerous or unsanitary building. However, the policy does speak to the fact that obviously heritage buildings are very important to the district, so we are looking to protect them wherever possible, but without compromising any health or safety issues. So why are we doing it? Section 132 of the Building Act requires that we have to have a dangerous and sanitary policy, so it's something we have to do. The policy we have in place at the moment was adopted in 2018, subject to a 5-year review, so we're at that point now where we need to go back out, check in with the community and make sure that it's doing what it should be doing, is fit for purpose for the next 5 years. So in terms of what we're proposing, The draft, we're proposing the draft goes out largely unchanged. There hasn't been any legislation which would change the way council approaches this topic and nor how we actually deal with it. The building team have reviewed the policy. They don't see any need for anything other than a few minor wording tweaks just to keep the policy current and up to date. And feedback from pre-engagement has completely been supportive of it. So we're not actually proposing anything in the way of major changes to this, the current approach. So before I hand to Teresa to discuss her policy, are there any questions or feedback that you want to have on this policy?
Probably. Oh, no,
You go first.
Just while you're talking around taking action on dangerous and affected buildings and the heritage values associated with them, and just seeing here that when it's deemed to be dangerous and working with relevant owners in terms of trying to come up with solutions for them to fix the problem with the buildings. The first, and I think we've talked about this before. Excuse me for repeating myself here, but can we learn a lot from, say, the Oamaru Heritage Precinct people?
Yeah.
Because obviously that area is of nationally significant heritage value. I remember going to school there 20 odd years ago, and that complete area was sort of deemed to be derelict. It was going to, at one stage, it was just going to be bulldozed and destroyed, and now it's the heart of Oamaru, really. Is there something that we can learn from that?
I think it's a very good question, and I think it's something that should definitely be thought about. Within this policy, I don't think we have the capacity within the policy. This policy is really just outlining our requirements under the Building Act. But in terms of the value that council places on heritage buildings, then yes, that's a piece of work that I think should potentially be looked at.
So in conjunction with the owners of those particular buildings as well, we can work to be able to help those owners, those ratepayers, to realise that through some of these other models that have been adopted?
I think I'd have to come back to you with a response from Julie, potentially directed at that. Certainly, the policy itself works with Heritage New Zealand. We're definitely trying to be speaking to the right people when we're looking at how we're actually going to remediate any issues that might arise. So that is the first port of call, is ensuring that we're actually protecting those buildings where we can. However, it is our obligation to ensure that they are safe to use. Yeah. So I don't know how much we can build that into this policy, but it's certainly something I'll speak to Julie, and I can come back to you directly.
Sure.
Just on that heritage building side of thing, I'm noting is this the attachments on the hub, is that the previous policy, or is this the
current
draft?
policy? This is,
so it doesn't have the amendments on there.
No. You'll be presented with that when it comes up with the statement proposal.
One of the bullet points on heritage buildings is the different New Zealand heritage list, and then also the Schedule 5.2 of the Southland District Plan 2018. Just wondering, for process, there's been a little bit of conversation of whether the district plan is something that we can look at, and there's been advice that with the national planning policy change and the kind of big scope on consultation on district plan, that it's a hard thing to look at. But we've also identified quite a few areas. I know that heritage buildings are one area that the community have pointed out that we have some gaps within the district plan, particularly up in the northern board area. How would changing the policy without addressing the district plan work?
I'll have to give that further thought and come back to you. Sorry, I wouldn't want to do an on-the-fly answer today.
I guess that follows on of at some point we need to have a conversation about are there components of the district plan that we're going to look at.
And this is already kind of raised with keeping track of a lot of those sort of things. So I guess this sort of feeds into that bigger picture as well as to potentially.
In many ways, this, as unfortunately said before, this policy is literally just giving council's documents under the Building Act. So we're kind of tied in terms of what we're able to include within it. But yes.
Well, I guess it if the district plan was to change and include more heritage buildings, then there's more at stake to consult on regarding the policy change. So it's just a kind of chicken egg.
Earthquakes are looked at under the Building Act. So this is the change in the language. This one.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Earthquakes are under the Building Act.
Yes, that's right.
So no longer explicitly mentioned in the title of this.
So they were part of this policy up till 2018, a legislation change that removed the council's obligation. They sit under the Building Act separately. So they are completely taken out of the equation. This policy does not cover pro buildings.
Councillor Dutton?
Just regarding dangerous buildings, where it's not actually the building, it's the grass growing up to the windows all around it that is certainly perceived as a fire risk. So I think our hands are a bit, or have been a bit tied with that due to legislation.
Yes,
It's certainly an issue that concerns a lot of people.
That was raised last time round. This policy doesn't cover overgrown sections, etc. I believe FENS, we deal with it under FENS.
Yeah.
That's certainly been an avenue we've looked at.
They did have rules about it, which they did away with, I think. My understanding.
My understanding was that actually FENS actually now covers us. Not covers us, I'm sorry, but they're dealt with under FENS. But I think certainly I know this was raised in 2018 in terms of how could a policy address that. This policy doesn't speak to that.
There's no way it can.
I don't think it's able to. It's very much tied in terms of it's the Building Act requirements. This is Southland District Council.
Small components under the district plan, but not specifically
not
for
this. It's an environmental health area that could be looked at. Any further questions? No. I'm going to hand on to
thank you.
Teresa.
Jane. Hello everyone, I'm here to talk about the Easter Sunday shop trading policy. So Easter Sunday is a restricted trading day, so all shops are to remain closed, except for certain shops under certain conditions. So these include garden centres, service stations, food takeaways, restaurants, cafes, souvenir shops, pharmacies and dairies. In 2016, the Shop Trading Hours Act allowed councils to have a policy which permits shops to be open in their own district, in the whole or part of the district on Easter Sunday. So that is the only aspect that council can make a decision on. We can't determine what type of shop can open or when it can open. For example, Anzac Day has got restricted hours rather than the whole day. So in 2017, council adopted a policy which allows council to operate in the whole of the district. So why are we doing this? Legislation requires council to review this policy by February 2024 or it will be automatically revoked. What are we proposing? Early engagement with stakeholders and the public indicates support for the policy to remain. Of the stakeholders we contacted, 3 supported and 1 opposed. The public response showed that 27 were in support and 9 opposed. Therefore, only minor amendments to the policy are proposed. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from Councillor Bias?
Thank you. Teresa, does anyone want all the shops to be allowed open rather than just exceptions?
Yes. You mean through the through the consultation that we went?
Yes, you've done the survey.
Yes.
Is anyone saying, well, perhaps we should just have no exceptions? Can you do that? Have everyone?
Yeah, so that's what we've currently got, that everyone can open.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
So we need to have this policy to enable that to happen. Yes, that's right. It's a bit of a reverse of policy. It's an enabling policy, but otherwise there's restrictions. Yeah.
So it's not just garden centres and cafes and restaurants that can open? It's everywhere.
Yes. Yes.
All shops.
All shops. There's no wiggle room on Friday, is it? That's still nationally set.
It's a public holiday. The Easter Sunday's a restricted trading day, but not a public holiday. It's unique in that regard.
No further questions? Councillor Daly?
Well, just what are the minor amendments you're proposing?
Oh, just within the policy, adding a map, required to add a map, and maybe just taking out the roles and responsibilities and just seeing what comes from the public consultation. But just minor. Okay, thank you. My next policy is the smoke-free open spaces. So what does this policy do? The policy discourages smoking in our open spaces with particular focus on where our young people gather. So that's sports fields, skate parks and playgrounds. It supports the government's goal for a smoke-free New Zealand by 2025. So this smoke-free goal is that fewer than 5% of New Zealanders smoke. So it's difficult to get a gauge on where we're at the moment, but I think somewhere between 85 and 90% of New Zealanders are smoke-free, and we'll probably get more of an idea when census figures come out later.
Does vaping come into this as well?
Yes, so this is the current policy, what the current policy does, and now we're just trying to see if we should be including vaping into it. Yeah.
Considering that driving through Winton this morning, I see in the main street there's a new vape. It's just opened up.
Don't even talk about that.
So it needs to be talked about. Go.
We do need to go ahead because it's the next health crisis that's coming our way, so we need to get ahead of the game.
And noting the submitters quite often do a long-term plan, and also the council from Smoke Free New Zealand. And
One thing, I've just been down to the Arts Mura Hickory space, and I remember at St Catherine's College, and in the day we used to smoke in the rhododendrons, all the borders. I was thought back to that actually when in relation to these.
See lots of vaping coming out of there as well.
Possibly, yeah.
So this policy is, I can carry on, or would you like to? Yep, okay. So this policy is not enforceable, so it's only an educational tool. And why I've come through to you today is to determine whether vaping should be included. So the government has seen vaping as a tool for their smoke-free goals, and as people move from smoking to vaping. But given the uptake of vaping from our youth, the government introduced legislation to make vaping products available for those that wish to stop vaping, but restricts it to our under 18s. So you can see from the graph there, that's from Action Smoking and Health. They do a year 10 survey, and they've been doing that since 1999. So the red line shows daily smoking, and that's dropped significantly. And they started surveying in 2015 for vaping, and that's increased a lot. So it started plateauing in 22, but time will tell if that's a trend.
So could you include the vaping and the smoking? Do you have to have an exception for people who are trying to stop smoking? Can it just be
No, they can.
So we talk about sports fields, so the smoking area outside of rugby club, is that caught up in that, or is that separate?
That's included in there.
Is that practical?
Well, it's educational, so...
Yeah, it's non-enforceable, but it's definitely practical, yeah.
Yeah.
So people who are vaping, there's no smoking, but you're allowed to vape.
Well, you can...
If you're trying to stop smoking, you're allowed to vape.
So sorry, your question is...
I'm just trying to get it clear. So we're trying to have an educational space where we're saying no smoking, but you can vape.
No.
No vaping as well.
Because the vaping's included in the
Adding
policy.
vaping.
And you can't, none of it's enforceable though.
No, it's educational, but I'm just wondering why there's an exception for trying to stop smoking, but you're allowed to vape.
Well, we want to include vaping in the policy because there's been a legislation change, so we include it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I haven't done it.
What's the expected cost of updating all the current non-smoking signs to add vaping, and what else could be? Because I know there's been discussion around like litter issues in similar areas. So if we're going to go and update a bunch of signs to include vaping, what else could maybe be another policy to look at, particularly in that litter space. I know that often in the park it's no smoking, no dogs or dogs on leash, and whether there's anything else, if we're going to go and spend some money to implement this, there might be some other, I'm going to say it, low-hanging fruit. Sorry, Jim.
We might need to move you to another part of the.
Just an idea. Anyway.
So with the signs, we are slowly putting more smoke-free signage on our signs as we create them, and you can put stickers on. If we're including vaping, after going through the public consultation, we can include stickers onto those signs, so they can slowly be incorporated within. We have got access to potentially free signs as well through public health, and I think slowly incorporated in, particularly in the focus areas.
Because it's a non-enforceable honour system, really, of please don't smoke here. Whereas another community issue being that littering is actually an enforceable thing under law, but we don't have any education signage around that, so it's kind of balancing up. If you're the only person sitting in a park and you choose to have a smoke and there's just a sign there that's, if a smoker lights a cigarette in the woods, does anyone hear it?
We can discuss that with
If someone leaves a cigarette butt behind, then it's litter.
Is it envisaged that the signs will be in Te Reo as well?
Possibly. Yes, I think some of them are available.
They're available now in Maori and English.
Perhaps we
No
should.
smoking, no vaping.
Perhaps we should be if we're looking to the future.
Yeah.
Maybe save the lettering and put a bigger picture with a cross, twice the size, more impact possibly. Just make it really big out there, no chance of mistaking it.
Through our signage guidelines, we do try and use graphics rather than words.
Yeah, I think
It's not just.
no one can feign ignorance in that regard. Thank you.
Cool.
Yes, thank you. So early engagement with stakeholders indicated support for including vaping in the policy, but public opinion was divided. So of the stakeholders we contacted, 4 were in support and no one opposed. And the public response was 7 were in support and 7 opposed. So we're proposing that vaping is included in the policy. The environmental health team and the community facilities team, which are the owners of the policy, support it. Contributes to social wellbeing by supporting health for our youth in particular, and follows national direction in health. So through formal public consultation, we can receive further views from the public and potentially ask which location should have a focus. If it goes beyond the type 1, which were the playgrounds and sports fields and skate parks.
Further discussion?
Yeah, just that's just a really interesting stat that you just said with regards to 7 for and 7 against. That's quite taken aback by that. Can you give us any more information around that in terms of how we came to that conclusion?
Do you mean what their responses
Well,
were?
I guess to put it in super plain English, I would have just naturally thought that there would have been a great percentage of people that would have rejected, the notion that having these areas available for smokers was, something to be acceptable behaviour, So I'm just kind of like wondering, is there a bigger picture kind of lens that we need to be looking at in terms of, is this just one particular subsection of the community that have been, measured? And is that a representation of how we are as a region?
Very small sample.
It's not statistically sound. So your percentage in terms of population, and if you look at the various open spaces around the district, wouldn't be statistically sound.
Right.
So if you've got 7 people in the district that want to vape or smoke in a certain place, then anybody that's NTA specific policy is going to be the one that speaks up. And everybody else generally is apathetic about it unless there's really sound reason to to say, no, I think it should definitely apply in this place, or it definitely should not apply in this place. But statistically, it's not a sound number anyway.
No.
It's just feedback.
Yeah, the early engagement was, an indication, but we could potentially flesh that out through our questioning, through our public consultation about what we ask. We can, have a think about how best to draw that information then.
Right, last one. I'm moving through nice and quick. So the use of unmanned aerial vehicle policy, the UAV policy. So I'm just going to quickly outline what a UAV is. I needed to look this up myself to see the parameters. So it covers all electric-powered, remote-controlled model aircraft that we'd commonly call drones that are capable of vertical takeoff and landing. It also includes handheld launch gliders. So in terms of what the policy does, civil aviation legislation rules changed in 2015, and that change gave Council the ability to either approve or decline UAV usage over land it owns or controls. Okay, so the policy basically then just gives us the framework so we can set that out. So the current policy is an enabling one. We take an enabling approach. We generally allow for the use of UAVs, providing that users comply with the conditions that we've outlined in the policy, and also the conditions that are already imposed by the CAA across New Zealand. Okay, so where there are circumstances where UAVs aren't permitted, except where approval's been given, a user can apply to Council for that consent. So that could be over a sports field, for example, if somebody else is using it, or where there's livestock, 50 metres of livestock, or a boundary that might border residential housing. So the policy outlines those general restrictions in terms of where consent might need to be given. In addition to that, we also have one local area that has been identified as a restricted area, and that's the Te Anau lakefront that was added as an amendment to the policy when we reviewed it last. So in that instance, permission's got to be sought from the local aircraft operators before approval can then be sought from Council. So in terms of why we're doing it, we're not actually required to have a policy regarding drone use, and it falls to the CAA to enforce it. So we could potentially outline our position through guidelines. Where a policy has been useful, however, is that Council's taken an educational approach to this rather than an enforcement approach, and the policy has been a really useful tool in terms of actually clarifying the conditions we've got around use, and I know certainly in the Te Anau area it's been a really useful tool on the lakefront. So the policy is subject to a 5-year review, which we do now, and so it gives us an opportunity to check back in with the community to make sure that it remains easy to use and current. So in terms of what we're proposing, some of you may be aware there was some recent drone legislation passed in April. That hasn't actually changed, it doesn't require any changes in terms of Council's approach to drone usage. It actually places more onus on drone users' responsibilities. So the onus is on them to make sure that they are acting in a way that minimises any risks or hazards. Okay, so it doesn't change our stance on it. We didn't have any, there were no comments from community boards in terms of changes that they wanted made to the policy, and the pre-engagement feedback was largely supportive of the approach we've been taking to date. So in consequence, we're probably looking at this point at only making minor changes just to update wording and just make sure it's fit for purpose again for the next 5 years, and I think most importantly make sure that it's a very user-friendly document for the public to access and find their way through. So happy to hand back to any further questions.
Yeah, sure. With regards to the operators of UAVs, sorry, it's been one of those days, isn't it? They must wear a high visibility vest.
Yes.
And then you talk about enforcement. How are you going to sort of practically do that with regards to, say, someone from outside of the area coming in operating their drone, and then, you know, someone sees it and says, well, you know, you need to be wearing a high-vis vest and so on, like, you know, is discretion going to be the better part of valour in that respect? Is it going to be, you know, are they going to be isolated incidences, or how are you going to enforce that?
Yeah, I think this is where, with the policy, that's where it has actually been a useful tool, certainly in areas where the community has been able to refer back to the policy to outline the conditions that are actually in place. We don't have enforcement of this policy. It's one of those areas, again, talk about chicken and egg, we don't have somebody out there monitoring the Te Ara lakefront, etc. It's something that we are reliant on members of the community being aware of what the restrictions are in place, and they have the ability to refer back to the policy to be informing a recreational user, for example, of what they need to be doing. If council does become aware of an incident, then we can pass it on to CAA to enforce. They have measures that they can utilise, from warnings right the way through to prosecution, depending on what the incident is. But it is something that, because we don't have enforcement officers in place, it's something that we do rely on the community to enforce for us.
Okay, so as an example, if you're in Te Anau, someone gets off a Milford bus, they go down to the waterfront, they send their drone up, you would hope that a member of the community would come in and say, hey guys, you know, just let you know, this is not really the way to do it.
Yeah, we've put signage along that area, and when the policy was last adopted, we visited all the hoteliers along the lakefront, giving copies of the policy so that they could actually put in guest rooms available for guests, so that we're trying to keep the community as informed as possible, so they know that they have this as a tool they can use, but also actually allowing guests into Te Anau to as much visibility of the policy as possible.
Have we had any issues or incidents around that?
Occasionally.
Yeah, the couple of
That's good.
Usually,
the couple of incidents we've had on the island, the local policeman
has dealt with,
sorted them out, and they've been basically around the wharf,
right? Yes.
where they're contravening actual Southport rule, not the district council.
Yeah. Certainly through council, we're not hearing of incidents coming through, but that's. I know that nationwide we're probably starting to see, with drone usage increasing, we'll probably see more incidents, so it's something to be aware of.
And that's probably something, Sarah, you could sort of point to too. You know, you'd been to a meeting recently around drone usage, hadn't you, and about sort of how it looks in the future with regards to businesses using drones.
Yeah. So that's just in its very early stages at the moment, but it wouldn't necessarily apply to the lakefront anyway. I mean, the issue with the lakefront is actually because you've got two operators there. You've got a helicopter company and you've got Wings and Water. So the policy is actually there to protect them. It's really not there to stop anything that's recreational or even just the standard flying things. It's specifically there to protect those two companies that operate in that space, because it would just be standard civil aviation stuff. I mean, some of these policies apply in other spaces for exactly the same reason.
It also has been really useful because we do get a lot of requests from professional companies, filming companies, to be allowed to go use our land for videoing and for interviews and things like that. And they have used that, and they've used the application forms that we've got. So it gives them a clear steer of what they can do on council land, and so we get frequent requests for being allowed to film.
So in that case, you know, I can only imagine that further use of agricultural drone usage will just, you know, continue and grow. Will there be sort of implications around a contractor who uses an agricultural drone for spraying, then, you know, if they're within that sort of 50-metre corridor of council land, you know, will they have to go through sort of like, I presume they would go through a process where they have to apply to council, you know, for some form of exemption, or would that be the case?
Have you dealt with anything? I'm lucky I have a subject expert here.
Well, I used to do the applications, we have never received anything in that regard, but yeah.
Is that because you just think they'll just go ahead and do it anyway?
Potentially. Yeah. So all the ones that I've been involved with were for filming, as Louise said. Yeah.
But as drone technology becomes more accepted for a number of different applications, I think it is something that we need to take into consideration. How long does this, is it 5 years?
Yes. Yeah.
This is
Used to review it more frequently.
Correct.
This is only over land or property owned and controlled by the district council.
That's right.
So people can give their consent.
Yeah, because the other, and the other aspect of it is, yes, we can. There's a methodology for application anyway within the legislation. But there are plenty of it. Like you can't fly a drone down the Milford corridor. So, and there are very specifically signs there at the beginning, just after you go over the Upakura, said no drone flights. So there is legislation, or there are. Whether it's totally legislated, I guess it's. We're not.
It's the whole national park, isn't it? Which essentially, once you're over the lake itself.
Flies before you get into the national park.
I guess the important thing to note is the fact that CAA is actually the enforcing body, and they do have a very active role in actually doing that. So it's a sort of subsidiary to that. Any further questions? Margaret, did you have?
No, I think I've got it locked and loaded for 5 years. That's what you were saying with the policy, because I'm a little futures coming very quickly, and we're looking at the Jetsons and emissions, and what if La Toscana start delivering pizzas down the waterfront? And
so potentially pulling that review time cycle to a 3-year cycle.
Well, you could leave it as a 5 and bring still,
if required,
because you can. Could be the council could request that happens, or it might be obvious that needs to happen earlier.
I think we need to be very aware that New Zealand is a test site for all sorts of different things, and the approach that I've recently had is absolutely looking at that type of service and what needs to happen in terms of allowing that innovation to occur. And if we do become a test site for McDonald's or whoever, then that does need to be factored in.
Might be worth a further conversation, I'm thinking maybe offline around that, just to see if there's something that could be built into this. That might be worth a conversation, to see if there's some flexibility rather than 2 years down the track finding we need to review the policy.
Yeah, it'd be worth some. I can go back to the person I've been talking to and just see if there's something that shows in this particular policy, and just let's make sure we're future proofing.
Yes. Well, that's great.
Can I ask an idea on the immediate idea? I just noted that you can't. One of them is above council buildings. So just as an example, we've got the community hall in Lumsden, and if the kind of custodian looking after that hall thinks that there might be some leaves blocking the gutter, what would be the way for that person to get permission to get someone locally with a drone to go have a look, to then send an RFS to council to come in?
Just do it.
Just do it, break the policy.
Talk to the mayor who's behind it and he can see the whole.
There you go. But you know what I mean? It's what is that permission? Because it could be a more efficient way to get up on a roof rather than sending someone out with the health and safety to get up on a ladder. How do we encourage the use? Like you was pointing out, the future of the drones. There's some. I'm not going to say it again, but there's some easy applications to immediate low-hanging fruits.
But if there was to your point though, if there was a plumbing contractor that used drones in his business all the time, he could almost get a permit from council to, under those conditions, to do it.
there's a process that can be followed, and it's a fairly efficient process through council, so that you can probably speak to the process with more authority than I can, but there is a very clear process in play. How you could streamline that in that instance, that's some thought to. It's more for the recreational user or somebody who's flying over a council building. That's probably more we were looking at in terms of those restrictions.
So an RFS would be the way to go.
Yeah.
And then if they're entering onto the road as well, so then we can bring in all the departments that need to okay.
So if you were renting out a hall to do an event and you had a photographer coming to do filming of the event and including a drone, you'd have to communicate to, I guess, facility users too, that if you want to use a drone, you'd have to get the permission to do so.
People like the Trails Trust have really effectively used the drone when they've been doing the Hydro Half Marathon. It's quite a lot of that has been filmed from a drone. You just have to make the appropriate application.
And you also have to be careful of neighbours.
It has, yes, it has been used in real estate in town. I think that's probably where we've seen more complaints than anything else. It certainly sparks more discussion on social media where real estate is used, because you're closer to the neighbours.
Well, thank you. Is there any further?
The only last slide was pretty much just outlining exactly the process I talked you through at the beginning, just in terms of what we've heard today. That's going to help inform our drafts. These will come back to you in June, and we'll be looking at consult all four together, July through to mid-August. And then it comes back to you for hearings, deliberations and adoption. So hopefully all signed and sealed by September. So thank you very much for all the input.
And just one quick reminder, keeping our minds, open to the fact that once we hear the formal consultation and have the feedback from them, that's when we make our decisions on that rather than preempting that. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Just one quick question, just though it might be not related to those, but the public trading in public spaces, is that coming up soon, or is that just?
I'm sorry, trading in public places? Yeah. Yes. Yep, that's the bylaw that's under review right now. We're just going to get these past you first. The bylaw, both the roading bylaw and the trading in public places bylaw are being reviewed.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Right, we'll now move back to the meeting where we've got a motion to move into public exclusion for the reasons outlined on page 95 of your agenda. Is someone willing to move? Councillor Spragan, all in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
That is carried. We'll just wait for the live stream to. And we'll